The first thing I registered was a dull throb behind my eyes, a persistent, rhythmic pulse that echoed the frantic beat of my own heart. It tasted like copper and old pennies, a phantom taste memory from the blood that had splattered on my tongue just hours before. Or was it days? Time felt like a broken thing, shattered into jagged fragments that refused to connect. My back was pressed against something rough, unyielding. Wood. Not the smooth, polished kind you would find in a nice house, but raw, splintery planks that dug into my skin, reminded me of the old, forgotten barn behind my childhood home. Except this one felt different. Heavier, older, like it had absorbed centuries of silence. I cracked open my eyes. Darkness. Utter, suffocating darkness. It was not the kind of darkness you get when the lights are out, the kind where your eyes adjust and you start to make out the vague shapes of furniture. This was absolute, impenetrable black, a void that swallowed light, sound, and hope. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed its way up my throat. I tried to push myself up, but my limbs felt like lead, sluggish and unresponsive. My head swam, and a wave of nausea washed over me. The memory of that man's crushed arm, the wet snap of bone, rising unbidden to the forefront of my mind. Then a faint glow. It was not a light source. Not really. More like the wood itself was faintly luminous, emitting a soft, ethereal luminescence that barely illuminated my immediate surroundings. Enough to confirm my worst fears. I was in a room, a small room, and there were no windows, no doors, just walls of seamlessly joined dark wood, stretching from the floor to the ceiling. My breath hitched, my lungs burned, not just from the panic, but from the air itself. It was thick, heavy, like breathing through a wet blanket. It smelled of old pine dust, and something metallic and acrid, like burnt offerings or stagnant blood. Hello. My voice was a croak, raw and unfamiliar, as if it belonged to someone else. It sounded weak, pathetic, swallowed almost instantly by the oppressive silence. No echo, just the dead air absorbing every vibration. I forced myself to sit up, my muscles screaming in protest. My hands, still stained with an invisible memory of gore, fell along the wall beside me. Solid, smooth, despite its rough appearance. No seams, no cracks, no give. It was like the cabin had been carved from a single gargantuan tree trunk. Or, more unsettlingly, like it had simply grown around me. Where was I? How did I get here? The last thing I remembered was that apartment. The sickening crunch of bone, the surge of power, the ancient chorus of my own voice whispering a threat. Then a blur, a rush of adrenaline, the pounding of my feet on asphalt, the cold night air whipping past my face. I remember the sensation of being hunted, but also the exhilarating thrill of being a hunter. And then nothing, just this impossible room. The sigils on my skin, those intricate, pulsing designs that had become a part of me, burned with a low, steady heat. It was not painful, not exactly, but it was a constant reminder of the entity within. Lena's ghost, or whatever she had become. It stirred now, a cold, vast presence unfurling in the back of my mind, not panicked like me, but observant, almost amused. This is where you belong, a thought echoed in my head, not in words, but in a profound, undeniable feeling. It was not my thought, it was the entity's. For now, my blood ran cold. Was this its doing? Had I, in my fugue state, conjured this impossible prison? Or had Elias, that charismatic monster, somehow tracked me down and trapped me here? The thought of Elias made my skin crawl. His obsidian shard, the mist rising from his followers, the parasitic nature of his enlightenment. He wanted to pierce the veil, to tap into something ancient and terrible. And now, I was in a place that felt like it existed beyond any veil, a place that defied all logic and reason. I got to my feet, swaying precariously. The room was small, maybe 10 by 10 feet, barely enough space to stretch my arms out without touching the walls. I started to systematically feel my way around the perimeter, my fingers tracing every inch of the wooden surface. I pushed, I pulled, I scraped my nails against the grain. Nothing. Not a single latch, not a hinge, not even a faint line indicating a hidden door. It was absolute, utterly sealed. A wave of despair, cold and heavy, washed over me. I was trapped, completely, irrevocably trapped. The silence pressing on me, a physical weight that threatened to crush my chest. My breath came in ragged gasps. I started to pound on the wall, a desperate, futile attempt to create some sound, any sound, to break the oppressive quiet. My fist connected with a dull thud, but offering no give, no reverberation, just a dead, flat resistance. It was like hitting a solid block of stone, not wood. My knuckles ached, but I kept going, a primal scream building in my throat, unheard even by myself. "Let me out!" I roared, my voice cracking. It was a pathetic sound, swallowed instantly. The entity within me remained silent, its presence a cool, detached observer. It did not seem to share my panic. In fact, it seemed content. I slumped to the floor, my back against a seemingly indestructible wall. My eyes scanned the room again, searching for anything I might have missed. The faint glow was constant, emanating from the wood itself. It did not flicker, did not dim. It cast no shadows, which made the room feel even more disorienting, flattening all perspective. The ceiling was just as seamless as the walls and floor, a smooth, dark expanse above me. How long had I been here? Hours? Days? My stomach rumbled, a hollow, aching protest. My throat was dry, parched. I had not eaten or drunk anything since before the gathering, before Lara's terrified whisper, before the killing. A cold dread settled in my gut. How long could I survive in here without food or water? This was not just a prison, it was a tomb. Then, a flicker of memory. Not mine, but the entity's. A fragmented image, like a glitch in a video game. A vast, dark forest. The trees impossibly tall, their branches reaching for sky that pulsed with an unnatural violet light. And then, a sense of falling, of being pulled, of becoming something else. It was unsettling, alien, and offered no answers, only more questions. I closed my eyes, trying to focus, try to piece together the last coherent moments. After killing the man, I had run through alleys, past overflowing dumpsters, the stench of urban decay doing little to mask a metallic tang in my mouth. I remembered the rush, the surge of power that had made my heart sing with a dark, terrifying joy. I was not just running from the monster. Anymore, I was running with it. We were a single, terrifying entity, unleashed. I remembered a sudden, overwhelming fatigue, a weariness that pulled at my very bones. The sigils had burned hotter than ever, feeling like brands seared into my flesh. The entity had hummed, a low, resonant vibration that filled my head, drowning out all other thoughts. And then the darkness, a deep, dreamless void from which I had just awoken in this impossible cabin. Had the entity brought me here? Was this a hiding place, a sanctuary, or something far more sinister? I tried to stand again, a new resolve hardening my spine. If this was a prison, I would find a way out. If this was a test, I would pass it. And if this was a tomb, I would rip my way out of it. I was no longer the man who had passively accepted Lena's ghost, the man who had tried to deny the power stirring within him. That man was gone, replaced by something harder, sharper. I focused on the wall directly in front of me, the faint glow illuminating its smooth, unblemished surface. I raised my fist, not in desperation this time, but with a cold, focused fury. I channeled the power, the raw, ancient energy that Lena's ghost had brought, that the sigils amplified. I felt it surge through my arm, a hot current that made my skin tingle and my muscles coil. The sigils on my forearms pulsed, glowing brighter, casting an eerie, shifting light on the dark wood. I slammed my fist into the wall. This time there was a sound. Not a thud, but a low, resonant thrum, like a gigantic, tightly strung drum. The wood did not break, did not splinter, did not even dent, but a faint ripple, like water disturbed by a stone, spread outwards from the point of impact, and the faint glow of the wood intensified, pulsing in response to my strike. My eyes widened. This was not just wood. This cabin was alive. A new kind of fear, colder and more profound than anything I had felt before, crawled up my spine. It was a fear of the unknown, the fear of something fundamentally unnatural. I tried again, channeling more power, more fury. The sigils on my body flared, outlining themselves in brilliant, otherworldly light under my skin. My arm felt like a conduit for a storm. I hit the wall again, harder. The thrum was louder this time, a deep, vibrating hum that resonated through my bones, shaking the very air in the cabin. The ripple spread faster and would glow in almost blinding intensity for a brief moment, then settled back to its faint luminescence. But something else happened. Where my fist had connected, a faint, almost imperceptible line appeared. It was not a crack. It was more like a scar, a thin, dark line that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. And from that line, a single drop of liquid slowly, agonizingly, began to well up. It was not sap. It was not water. It was thick, viscous, and a color I could only describe as deep, unsettling violet. It looked like blood, but not human blood. It looked like the sky and the entity's fragmented memory. I stared at the drop, mesmerized and horrified. It slowly elongated, then detached, followed an almost imperceptible plink onto the wooden floor. It did not spread. It just sat there, a perfect, shimmering bead of violet liquid. The entity's presence in my mind sharpened. It nourishes us, it whispered, a thought that felt like a cold caress. I recoiled, scrambling away from the wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. Nourishes us. What did that mean? Was the cabin feeding on me? Or was the cabin itself a source of sustenance for the entity? Was it a living thing, and this violet liquid its lifeblood? My gaze fell upon the drop of violet liquid on the floor. It shimmered, almost invitingly. A strange, undeniable hunger, not for food or water, but for power, began to stir within me. It was not my hunger, not entirely. It was the entity's. It was a dark, insatiable craving that echoed through my very being. No, I whispered, shaking my head. I would not. I could not. This was too much. This was beyond anything I had ever imagined. But the hunger persisted, a gnawing emptiness that began to overshadow my fear. The cabin was silent again, but the silence felt different now. It felt watchful, expectant. I stared at the drop. It was still there, glowing faintly, reflecting the wood's own luminescence. My hand, as if acting on its own volition, reached out. My fingers trembled, hovering just above the violet bead. The entity hummed, a low, resonant vibration that filled my head, a soundless encouragement. Take it. My skin was crawling, every instinct screaming at me to run, to recoil. But another instinct, a darker, more primitive one, urged me forward. This was power. This was what Lena had sought. This was what Elias craved. And it was right here within my grasp. My fingertip brushed the surface of the violet liquid. It was cool, almost gelatinous. As soon as it made contact, a jolt, not pain, but pure, raw energy, shot up my arm, through my chest, and into my very core. The sigils on my skin flared with an almost painful brilliance, feeling as though they were burning from the inside out. I gasped, pulling my hand back, but it was too late. The drop of liquid had been absorbed, leaving no trace on my fingertip or the wood. But the energy remained, surging through me, electric and exhilarating. My senses sharpened. The faint smell of burnt offerings in the air became clearer, more complex, revealing hints of ozone and something akin to old parchment. The low hum of the cabin, which I had only just registered, now felt like a symphony of vibrations, each one distinct and meaningful. My mind would have been foggy and disoriented, suddenly felt clear, sharper than it had ever been. It was like I had been living in a dream, and now, for the first time, I was truly awake. And with this new clarity came a horrifying realization. The cabin was not just a prison, it was a crucible, a place of transformation. The entity's presence was no longer separate, distinct consciousness. It was merging with me, becoming indistinguishable from my own thoughts, my own feelings. Lena's ghost, which had once felt like a passenger, was now the very engine of my being. Her desires, her ancient knowledge, her hunger for power, they were becoming my desires, my knowledge, my hunger. I looked at my hands, no longer just my hands, but instruments of immense, terrifying power. The sigils pulsed, not just on my forearms, but now spreading faintly across my chest, up my neck, even across my face, like intricate, glowing tattoos. I could feel the energy thrumming beneath my skin, waiting to be unleashed. The cabin remained silent, but it felt less like a prison now, and more like a chamber, a birthing chamber. I stood up, no longer feeling the ache in my muscles, the fatigue in my bones. My body felt lighter, stronger, infused with an alien vitality. My eyes, I imagined, must be glowing with the same faint luminescence as the cabin walls. I walked back to the spot where I had struck the wall, where the violet liquid had welled up. I pressed my palm against it, not to strike, but to feel. It would thrum beneath my touch, a low, steady pulse that mirrored the new rhythm of my own heart. It was a connection, a resonance. The cabin was not just a container. It was an extension of us. The thought that Elias might have sent me here, or that he had created this place, now seemed almost laughable. Elias was a charlatan, a parasite, a scavenger picking at the edges of true power. This was something else entirely. Something far older, far more potent. A memory, clear and vivid, flashed into my mind. Not mine, not even Lena's, but something deeper, something ancient. A vast, cosmic awareness, a sense of infinite possibility, of realities bending and breaking at will. It was a cosmic consciousness Elias had spoken of, but not as a philosophical concept. It was a living, breathing, terrifying truth, and I was now a part of it. The cabin, I realized, was not built. It was willed into existence. And if it could be willed into existence, it could be unwilled, or perhaps reshaped. I closed my eyes, focusing on the seamless wall in front of me. I concentrated, not on brute force, but on the essence of the wood, on the energy that flowed through it. I felt the connection, the subtle vibrations that linked me to its very core. I pictured an opening, not a door, not a window, but a shimmering gateway, a tear in the fabric of this impossible reality. A low groan, like the shifting of tectonic plates, emanated from the wall. The faint glow intensified, then dimmed, then pulsed again. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy. I felt a tremendous pressure build in my head, as if my skull were about to crack open. Then, with a sound like tearing silk, a fissure appeared in the wall. It was not a physical crack. It was a shimmering, iridescent tear, a swirling vortex of colors I had never seen before, colors that defied the known spectrum. Beyond it, I could glimpse nothing. An infinite, swirling void that promised both utter destruction and boundless creation. It was a veil, not pierced by some ritual, but ripped open by sheer, raw will. My will. Our will. I opened my eyes. The fissure pulsed, inviting. It was not an escape route from a prison. It was a doorway to a reality I was now ready to inhabit. The entity within me, no longer a separate voice, but my own inner monologue, spoke. The hunt begins anew. I stepped towards a shimmering opening, no longer afraid. The cabin, this impossible place, had served its purpose. It had transformed me. It had awakened something ancient and terrible within my very being. As I reached the threshold, I glanced back at the cabin. It was still a small, windowless, doorless room, but it no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a chrysalis, now shed, the faint glow that would seem to dim, as if its power had been transferred, absorbed into me. I stepped through the shimmering tear in reality. The world on the other side was not what I expected. It was not a dark forest, nor a bustling city street. It was an expanse of pure, unadulterated energy, a canvas of swirling colors and impossible geometries. And in the distance, a faint, almost imperceptible hum, like a distant choir, beckoned. The hunt had indeed begun. But I was no longer running with the monster. I was the monster, and the universe, in all its terrifying, beautiful chaos, was now my hunting ground. Elias, Ilera, the Gathering, the sigils, they were all just stepping stones on a path that stretched into infinity, a path I was now ready to walk. The tear in reality shimmered behind me, then slowly, silently, began to close, sealing off the cabin, sealing off the old world. I was alone, and yet I was more complete than I had ever been. The silence here was not oppressive, but resonant, filled with the promise of unimaginable power. My voice, now a chorus of ancient whispers and modern determination, echoed through the void. Let them try to find me now. The hunt was on, and this time, there was no escaping the predator. For I was it, the message from Ilera. Sounds interesting, felt like a lie even as I typed it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a phantom tremor running through them. Interesting was an understatement. Terrifying, more like it. But the alternative, the gnawing emptiness, the whispers of Lena and the entity, was a terror I already knew. This was a new flavor of fear, one laced with desperate, almost suicidal hope for connection. I spent the next few days in a haze, my secluded cabin feeling less like a refuge and more like a cage. The sigils pulsed beneath my skin, a constant low throb that echoed the entity's growing impatience. It wanted out, it wanted to consume, and I was its unwilling vessel, fighting a losing battle. My reflection in the grimy cabin window showed not just my own gaunt face, but the distorted, shadowy outline of something else, something ancient and hungry, peering over my shoulder. Ilera's instructions were simple, almost mundane, which made them all the more unsettling. A specific address in a part of town I rarely visited, a small, unassuming building tucked away between a laundromat and a boarded-up storefront. Just knock, she would said, and tell them Ilera sent you. No code words, no secret handshakes, just a name. It felt too easy, too casual for a gathering exploring deeper truths. My gut screamed at me, but the entity within stirred a low hum of anticipation, almost curiosity. It felt like it was pulling me, not just to Ilera, but to whatever lay beyond that door. The drive was short, but felt endless. Each mile brought me closer to a decision point, a precipice. The city lights, usually a comforting blur, now seemed to mock me, their artificial glow a stark contrast to the growing darkness within. I parked my beat-up sedan down the street, the engine ticking as it cooled, a lonely sound in the evening quiet. The building Ilera had described was even more nondescript than I would imagine a faded brick facade, a single grime-streaked window, and a heavy, unpainted door. No signs, no indications of what lay inside. Taking a deep breath, I forced my aching legs together. My hand would clamor, and I could feel the sigils burning, a warning or a welcome. I could not tell. I raised my hand and knocked, the sound echoing hollowly in the quiet street. For a moment, nothing. Then a soft click, and the door opened inward, revealing not Ilera, but a man. He was tall and slender, with an almost too perfect smile and eyes that seemed to hold a vast, unsettling calm. His dark hair was slicked back, and he wore a simple, dark tunic that looked more ceremonial than casual. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "You must be Lena." I replied, using the name I would given Alara, a bitter irony that twisted my gut. The real Lena was gone, consumed, her name now a hollow echo. "Ah, Lena, Alara told us to expect you." He stepped aside, gesturing me in. The interior was a stark contrast to the drab exterior. The room was dimly lit, bathed in the soft, warm glow of numerous candles. The air was thick with the scent of incense, sandalwood, and something else, something earthy and vaguely metallic. Tapestries adorned the walls, depicting intricate, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in the flickering light. About a dozen people sat on cushions, arranged in a semicircle on the floor, their faces illuminated by the candlelight. They were a diverse group, young and old, men and women, all dressed in similar simple, dark clothing. They looked up as I entered, their expressions a mix of curiosity and an unsettling serenity. And then I saw Alara. She was sitting near the front, her fiery red hair a beacon in the dim room, her unerringly bright green eyes fixed on me. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement that only amplified my unease. She looked different here, more at home. Her usual vibrant energy was tempered by the same unsettling calm that permeated the room. The man who had let me in closed the door softly behind me, and then moved to the center of the semicircle. "Please, find a cushion." "Lena," he offered, his voice still that unerringly smooth baritone. I chose one near the back, trying to melt into the shadows, acutely aware of every gaze. "My name is Elias," he announced, his voice carrying easily through the quiet room. "And we are gathered here tonight to continue our journey, to delve deeper into the truths that lie beyond the veil of mundane existence." His words were carefully chosen, almost poetic, but they sent a chill down my spine. This was not a book club. This was exactly what my rational mind had screamed occult. He began to speak, his words weaving a narrative of cosmic consciousness, ancient energies, and a hidden reality that lay just beyond our perception. He spoke of the veil, a thin membrane separating our world from a realm of pure potential, a place where true power resided. He claimed that through specific practices, through attunement, one could pierce this veil, connect with these energies, and transcend the limitations of the physical self. As he spoke, a strange sensation began to ripple through the room. It was not just the incense or the flickering candlelight. There was a subtle hum, a vibration that seemed to emanate from Elias himself, spreading outward, touching everyone in the room. It felt familiar, too familiar. It was like the low thrumming of the sigils beneath my skin, only amplified, externalized. The entity within me stirred, a low growl of recognition, or perhaps hunger. My mind raced. Was this what it wanted? Was this why it had drawn me here? To a place where others were unknowingly, or knowingly, dabbling in forces similar to the one that possessed me. I felt a terrifying resonance, like two discordant notes suddenly finding a twisted harmony. Elias's gaze swept over the room, lingering on each person, a silent assessment. When his eyes met mine, a jolt went through me. There was something in their depths, a knowing glint that made my blood run cold. He was not just charismatic, he was perceptive. He saw something in me, something I desperately tried to hide. Tonight, Elias continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, we will attempt a deeper attunement. We will reach further, beyond the usual tremors, into the very heart of the veil. He produced a small, intricately carved wooden box from beneath his cushion. As he opened it, a faint metallic scent, like old blood and ozone, wafted through the air, momentarily overpowering the incense. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, was a single obsidian shard. It was perfectly smooth and possibly black, and seemed to absorb the candlelight around it. This, he announced, holding it up, is a conduit, a focal point for our combined intent. He began to chant, a low, guttural sound that was unlike any language I would ever heard. The others in the room joined in, their voices rising in a soft, hypnotic chorus. The hum in the air intensified, becoming a palpable pressure against my eardrums. The sigils on my arms burned, a fiery agony that threatened to consume me. The entity within me was no longer merely stirring, it was awake, agitated, its whispers becoming a cacophony of ancient demands. I watched, horrified, as the faces of the people around me began to subtly change. Their eyes, once serene, now held a vacant, almost glassy stare. Their skin seemed to tighten, their features becoming more angular, less human. A thin, almost imperceptible mist seemed to rise from their bodies, twisting and swirling in the dim light, drawn towards the obsidian shard in Elias's hand. This was not spiritual connection. This was something else, something parasitic. Elias was not guiding them to enlightenment. He was feeding on them, or perhaps on the energy they were unwittingly releasing. And the entity within me was screaming its approval, its hunger mirroring his. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. I had to get out. But the door was behind me, and Elias was between me and it, his eyes now glowing faintly with an unnatural light. The chant grew louder, more insistent, and the pressure in the room became almost unbearable. My head throbbed, and a wave of nausea washed over me. Suddenly, Ilera turned to me, her green eyes now wide and dilated, reflecting the unnatural glow from Elias. There was no recognition in them, only that same vacant stare. But then, for a fleeting moment, a spark of something else, a flicker of fear, or perhaps a warning. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Elias, as if sensing my growing alarm, stopped chanting. The room fell silent, the hum slowly fading. He looked at me, his perfect smile returning, but this time was devoid of warmth, a predator's grin. "Lena," he said, his voice now colder, sharper. "You possess a unique resonance, a power beyond anything these humble souls can offer." My heart hammered against my ribs. He knew about the entity. "Come," he beckoned, extending a hand towards me, the obsidian shard still clutched in his other. "Join us. Let us help you truly embrace what you are. Let us guide that power, together." The entity within me pulsed, a seductive whisper urging me forward, promising release, promising power. But the image of Lena, my friend, consumed and gone, flashed in my mind. No, this was not release. This was another form of consumption, another trap. No, I choked out, my voice hoarse. Elias's smile faltered. The calm facade cracked, revealing a flicker of irritation, then something darker. "Such a waste," he murmured. He raised the obsidian shard, and the mist that had been rising from the others in the room seemed to coalesce, forming shadowy tendrils that snaked towards me. The people around me, still in their trance, began to stir, their movements slow and jerky, like puppets on invisible strings. Panic seized me. I scrambled to my feet, knocking over my cushion. The entity roared within me, a primal sound that felt like it tore through my very being. I could feel its power surging, fighting against my control, wanting to lash out, to consume. "You cannot resist what you are." "Lena," Elias said, his voice now a command. "The veil calls to you, just as it calls to us all." I did not wait. I turned and bolted for the door, my legs screaming in protest. The shadowy tendrils lashed out, brushing against my back, sending a wave of ice and fire through me. I reached the door, fumbling for the handle, my fingers slick with sweat. Just as I grasped it, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I cried out, spinning around. It was Ilera. Her eyes were still vacant, but her grip was surprisingly strong. She was trying to stop me, but then a subtle shift. Her grip faltered, her fingers twitching. For a fraction of a second, her green eyes cleared and a silent plea, a desperate warning, flashed within them. "Run," she mouthed, barely audible, before her eyes glazed over again, and she stumbled, releasing me. That moment of clarity, that flicker of the old Ilera, gave me the opening I needed. I yanked the door open and burst out into the cool night air, gasping for breath. The door slammed shut behind me with a sickening thud, cutting off the chanting and the oppressive hum. I did not look back. I ran blindly, fueled by adrenaline and a primal terror. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs ached, until the distant city lights blurred through my tear-filled eyes. I did not stop until I reached my car, fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely insert them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a comforting sound of normalcy. I sped away, leaving the nondescript building and its horrors behind. But I knew it was not over. Elias knew about me. He knew about the entity. And Alara, what had happened to her. I drove aimlessly for hours, the image of Elias's predatory smile and Alara's brief, terrified warning replaying in my mind. The cabin felt too far, too exposed. I needed a place to hide, a place to think. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Alara. My heart leaped, then sank. It could not be her. Not really. I pulled over the side of a deserted road and stared at the screen. The message was short, I need help. He knows I helped you. Meet me at my place, 14B Willow Creek Apartments. Do not tell anyone. My rational mind screamed that it was a trap. Elias must have forced her, or was using her phone. But that flicker in her eyes, that desperate plea. What if she really was in trouble? What if she was fighting him, just like I was fighting the entity? The desperate need for connection, for someone who understood, even someone caught in a similar nightmare, overruled my caution. I had to go. Willow Creek Apartments was a sprawling, somewhat run-down complex on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where the paint was peeling, and the hallways smelled faintly of stale cigarettes and desperation. I parked my car a few blocks away, trying to be inconspicuous, my heart still hammering against my ribs. I found Building 14, then Apartment B. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of darkness inviting me in. My hand trembled as I pushed it open further. Alara, I whispered, my voice barely audible. The apartment was small, sparsely furnished, and surprisingly clean. Moonlight filtered through the blinds, casting long, eerie shadows across the living room. Alara, I called again, stepping inside. The air was cold, still. No sign of her. A chill ran down my spine. This was definitely a trap. I should leave. But something held me there, a morbid curiosity, or perhaps the entity's own twisted desire to understand its new adversary. I walked further into the living room, my eyes scanning for any sign of life, any clue. On a small coffee table, there was a stack of papers, covered in the same intricate geometric patterns I would seen on the tapestries in Elias's gathering place. They looked like diagrams, charts of some kind, filled with symbols I did not recognize. And then, lying on top of the stack, was a small, ornate dagger. Its blade was dark, almost black, like the obsidian shard Elias had used. My breath hitched. This was not just a trap, it was a setup. Alara would not have this. Not the Alara I thought I knew. I picked up the dagger, its hilt cool against my palm, its weight surprisingly balanced. It felt ceremonial. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around, the dagger held defensively. Nothing, just shadows. My paranoia was working overtime. I needed to search the place, find out what was going on. I moved into the tiny kitchen. The countertops were bare, save for a single, half-empty mug. I opened the cabinets. Dishes, canned goods, nothing unusual. Then I tried the drawer beneath the counter. It was stuck. I tugged harder, and it finally slid open with a groan. Inside, nestled among a few kitchen utensils, was a small, black handgun. It looked out of place, menacing. My fingers brushed against its cold metal. This was definitely not Alara's. A cold dread settled in my stomach. What kind of person had a ceremonial dagger and a handgun hidden in their kitchen drawer? I moved into the bedroom, my heart pounding. The bed was neatly made, a simple quilt covering it. On the nightstand, A book lay open, its pages filled with more of those strange symbols. I picked it up. It was heavy, bound in dark leather. The title was in a language I did not understand, but the illustrations were disturbing, grotesque figures, twisted beasts, and humanoid with eyes that glowed with an unholy light. I put the book down, my hand shaking. This was a library of the occult, a guide to summoning or controlling whatever Elias was dabbling in. And then I saw it, tucked beneath a stack of folded clothes in the dresser, a small, flat box. I pulled it out. It was a gun case. My fingers fumbled with the clasps, and it sprang open. Inside, nestled in foam, were 2 more handguns, larger than the one in the kitchen, along with several clips of ammunition. My blood ran cold. 3 handguns, a ceremonial dagger. This was not Alara's apartment. Or if it was, Alara was not who she seemed. The prompt had said his apartment. This had to be his apartment. Elias's, or one of his devoted followers. A male follower. A sudden, horrifying thought struck me. What if Alara was a victim? 2, what if her profile, her messages, were all a lure? A way to draw in people like me. People with experiences beyond the mundane. People with unique resonance for Elias to exploit. And she, in her fleeting moment of clarity, had tried to warn me. My eyes darted around the room. If there were weapons hidden in the kitchen and the dresser, where else? I checked under the bed. Nothing. I ran my hand along the wall, searching for any loose panels. Then, I noticed a subtle discoloration on the carpet beneath the window. I knelt, my fingers tracing the outline of a small, square panel. It was not part of floorboards. It was a hidden compartment. With a grunt, I pried it open. Inside, resting on a velvet lining, was not a gun, but a small, heavy tome, bound in dark, cracked leather. Its cover was emblazoned with the same geometric patterns from the tapestries and diagrams, and beside it a small, silver amulet, intricately carved with symbols that seemed to writhe and coil. This was not a weapon in the traditional sense, but it felt far more dangerous. It felt like a key to unlocking whatever Elias was doing. As I reached for the book, a faint, sickly sweet scent wafted from the compartment, the same metallic, ozone-like smell that had accompanied Elias's obsidian shard. My hand recoiled, a wave of nausea washing over me. This was the source of the insidious energy, the true heart of their ritual. The entity within me was no longer just agitated, it was furious. It thrashed, its whispers becoming a deafening roar in my mind, a primal scream of both recognition and rage. It hated this place, this power, or perhaps it recognized a rival. A sudden noise from the living room. A creak, a muffled thud. Someone was here. Someone had entered the apartment. My heart leaped into my throat. Elias. It had to be him. I scrambled back, the dagger still clutched in my hand, my eyes wide with terror. I was trapped. I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving through the living room. Then a voice. Not Elias's, smooth baritone, but a lower, gruffer male voice. Alara, you here. My blood ran cold. It was not Elias. It was someone else. And he was calling for Alara. This was her apartment, or at least a place she frequented. And these weapons, they were not just for Elias. They were for them. I heard him move towards the kitchen. I was still in the bedroom, hidden from his view. I had to get out. I glanced at the window. It was small, probably too high to jump from without injury. The man's footsteps paused in the kitchen. I heard the clink of metal. He was in the drawer where I would found the first handgun. He was looking for it. My mind raced. The dagger was in my hand. It felt light, almost useless against a handgun. But the entity within me was stirring, its power surging, offering me a different kind of weapon. Its whispers, once insidious, now held a fierce, protective edge. It recognized danger and it was ready to fight. Ilera, the man called again, his voice closer now, moving toward the bedroom. I know you are here. Elias sent me. My blood ran cold. Elias had sent him. This was definitely a trap. And Ilera, she was either dead or worse. She was one of them, fully consumed. I had to act. Now, as the man's shadow fell across the bedroom doorway, I did not hesitate. The entity within me surged, a wave of raw, ancient power. I did not know what it would do, but I knew I could not fight this alone. My hands burned, the sigils flaring to life, the air around me crackling with an unseen energy. The man stepped into the room, a large, burly figure, a handgun clutched in his fist. His eyes, devoid of any warmth, widened as he saw me, not just me, but the shimmering, distorted aura that now radiated from my body. He raised his gun, his finger tightening on the trigger, but he was too slow. A silent scream tore through my mind, a primal roar from the entity. The air around me twisted, coalescing into a black, shadowy tendril that shot out from my outstretched hand, not unlike the Miss Elias had conjured, but darker, more potent, more alive. It wrapped around the man's arm, crushing his grip on the weapon. He cried out, a guttural sound of pain and surprise, as the gun clattered to the floor. The tendril tightened, lifting him off his feet, his struggles weak against the sudden, overwhelming force. His eyes, now filled with pure terror, stared at me, at the monster that now stood before him, the monster I was becoming. You should have left me alone. I whispered, my voice not my own, but a chorus of ancient voices, echoing with malice and power. The entity was in control, but I was still there, a horrified passenger, witnessing its terrifying capabilities. The tendril tightened further, and with a sickening crack, the man's struggle ceased. He slumped lifeless as the shadow tendril dissolved back into the air, leaving only the lingering scent of ozone and the heavy silence of the apartment. I stood there, trembling, the power receding, leaving me weak and breathless. The sigil still burned, a dull ache now, a reminder of what I had just done, what I could do. I looked at the dead man, then at the hidden weapons of handguns, the ceremonial dagger, the occult book, the amulet. Hilaire's apartment, or rather his apartment, was a den of dark secrets, a place where mundane and monstrous intertwined. This was not just about escape anymore. This was about survival. And I was no longer just running from the monster within me. I was running with it. And Elias, and whatever he commanded, had just become my prey. The hunt had begun. Mark appeared, revealing he would left the keys for me. The air in that dilapidated house, already thick with the scent of decay and old blood, suddenly felt like a physical weight crushing down on me. My heart, which had been hammering against my ribs since I first stepped inside, now seemed to stop altogether, only to restart with frantic, agonizing beat. He stood in the doorway of what looked like a pantry or a small storage room, a shadow against the dim light, filtering through a grimy window somewhere behind him. His predatory grin, the one that had haunted my nightmares for months, stretched across his face, wider and more chilling than I remembered. It was not a smile of amusement. It was a smile of a hunter who had just cornered his prey. "Took you long enough," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sent shivers down my spine. It was calm, too calm, like he was discussing the weather and not the fact that he was a monster standing over a collection of human trophies. "I almost thought you would not come. Had to leave a few extra breadcrumbs, did not I?" My breath hitched in my throat. Breadcrumbs. The keys. The way he would left them in my jacket pocket after our struggle, knowing I would find them, knowing my desperate need for closure would drive me right back to him. He had not vanished, he would have been waiting. All this time, while I was trapped in my fear, thinking I was safe, he was out there orchestrating this. My stomach churned, a cold wave of nausea washing over me. Every single fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there paralyzed. But my feet felt glued to the floor, my voice caught somewhere deep in my chest. He stepped further into the room, and I saw he was holding something in his hand. It was a long, thin rope, expertly braided, with a series of loops and knots. It looked innocent enough, like something you would use to tie down luggage, but the way he held it, the way his eyes gleamed, told me its purpose was far more sinister. You know, he continued, his gaze sweeping over the dusty, blood-splattered room, lingering on the open wooden box, filled with the ghastly trophies I would uncovered. I was actually starting to get bored. The others, they were predictable, so easy to lure. But you made it a challenge. The chase, the escape, the waiting, it is all part of fun. Is not it? He took another step, and I instinctively recoiled, stumbling backward until my back hit the rough, plaster-flaking wall. The smell of mildew and stale blood was overpowering now, mingling with the metallic tang of fear in my own mouth. My heart was a frantic drum solo, echoing in my ears, drowning out everything else. What would you want? I finally managed to croak, my voice barely a whisper, ragged and trembling. It sounded alien, even to me. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that scraped against my nerves. Want? Oh, honey, I want to play. I have been waiting to play with you. The moment I saw you, there was just something about you. A spark, a certain fire. The others, they just faded. But you fought back. You survived. That is what made you special. He gestured vaguely around the room. This is not just a house. You know, it is my game board. And you, my dear, are the star player. My mind raced, trying to make sense of his twisted words, trying to find an escape route, any way out of this nightmare. But there was nowhere to go. The front door was behind him, and the windows were either boarded up or too small and high to reach. I was trapped. You left the keys for me. I repeated, the realization hitting me with the force of physical blow. You wanted me to find this place. Of course, he confirmed, his smile widening. It is all part of the game. A little treasure hunt. I wanted to see if you were clever enough to follow the clues. And you were. Good girl. The condescending tone made my blood boil, but the fear kept me rooted. You see, most people, they just disappear. No one ever comes looking. But you just had to know, did not you? That is what makes you so much more interesting. That curiosity, that drive for closure. It is a beautiful weakness, really. He took another slow step forward, and I could feel the cold sweat trickling down my spine. My eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for anything, a weapon, a distraction, anything that could give me an advantage. The only things visible were the dusty relics of his past victims, silent witnesses to my impending doom. This is not just about the hunt, though, Mark continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It is about the connection, the intimacy. You and me. Here. Now. It is a game, yes, but it is also a date. He emphasized the word date with a sickening leer, and I felt a fresh wave of terror wash over me. A date. This was his idea of a date. This was beyond sick. This was pure, unadulterated evil. A game with restraints, he added, almost as an afterthought, but the words hit me like a physical blow. My breath caught again. That rope in his hand, his earlier fascination with my fight, my survival, it all clicked into place. This was not just a random act of violence. This was a meticulously planned, sadistic ritual. What kind of game? I asked, my voice still trembling, but a flicker of defiance, born of sheer terror, sparked within me. I needed to buy time. I needed to understand what was happening. He chuckled again, a low, guttural sound. Oh, the best kind. The kind where we explore limits, where we push boundaries, where we see just how much you can take, and how much I can give. He paused, his eyes narrowing, studying me. You are scared. Good. That is a good starting point. But fear can also be invigorating. For both of us. He moved closer, and I could smell him now, a faint, sickly sweet odor mixed with something metallic, like old blood and stale sweat. It was the smell of death. I realized with a horrifying clarity. He was not just a monster, he was a walking mausoleum. You know, when I first saw you, I thought, now that is a worthy opponent. Most of them just break. Too easily. But you've got spirit. And I love breaking spirit. It is so much more satisfying when there is something to shatter. My mind was a chaotic mess of fear, anger, and a desperate struggle for survival. I could not just stand there and let him do this. I had to fight. I had to try. My eyes scanned the room again, faster this time. The open box of trophies. A rusty old shovel leaning against the far wall, half hidden by shadows. It was too far. He was too close. I am not playing your game, I said, trying to inject some firmness into my voice, but it still came out shaky. He raised an eyebrow, a mocking smirk playing on his lips. Oh, but you already are. You walked right into my living room. Did not you? You picked up my keys. You found my little treasures. You are practically begging for it. Sweetheart. He lunged then, not with a wild, uncontrolled attack, but with a chilling precision. My instincts, honed by months of paranoia, screamed at me. I ducked, sliding under his outstretched arm, a burst of adrenaline propelling me forward. I did not know where I was going, just away from him. I scrambled past him, towards the doorway, towards the front of the house, towards a faint hope of an exit. Naughty, naughty, he purred, his voice closer than I expected. He was fast, too fast. I burst through the doorway into a narrow, dark hallway. The air here was even colder, laced with the smell of damp earth and decay. On my left, I saw a staircase, its wooden steps creaking under my imaginary weight. On my right, another closed door, and straight ahead, a faint sliver of light, which I hope was a front door. I did not hesitate. I sprinted towards the light, my lungs burning, my legs pumping. Every fiber of my being was focused on that sliver, that promise of freedom. But the house was a maze, a labyrinth designed to trap. The hallway felt endless, stretching out into an inky blackness. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed behind me. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Mark was right there, a few feet behind me, his eyes gleaming in the gloom. He was not running, he was just walking, a slow, deliberate pace, like he was enjoying the chase. He was not even breathing heavily. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate bird trapped in a cage. He was toying with me. He wanted me to run, to exhaust myself, to build up the false hope of escape before snatching it away. I reached the end of the hallway, a heavy, wooden door blocking my path. My fingers fumbled for the doorknob, desperately twisting it. It was locked. Of course, it was locked. A wave of despair washed over me, cold and suffocating. Looking for an exit. Mark's voice was right behind me now, a whisper against my ear. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. He was standing impossibly close, his eyes fixed on mine, a look of pure, unadulterated pleasure on his face. He held up a set of keys, jingling them softly. These are the real keys, darling. The ones you found were just to get you inside. To my little playground. My blood ran cold. He had planned everything. Every single step. The keys in my pocket. The dilapidated house. The trophies. This horrifying confrontation. It was all a meticulously crafted trap, and I had walked right into it, like a lamb to the slaughter. My eyes darted around, searching for anything. My gaze landed on an old, heavy-looking coat racked near the door. It was made of dark, gnarled wood with several sharp metal hooks. It was old, probably heavy. Maybe, before I could even formulate a plan, he moved. He grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice, iron hard and unyielding. I cried out, struggling against him, kicking and clawing, but it was no use. He was too strong, too focused. He dragged me away from the door, back into the dark hallway. "We are not done playing yet," he murmured, his voice laced with a chilling amusement. "The game has only just begun." He pulled me back toward the room where I would found the trophies. My stomach lurched. I did not want to go back there. That room felt like the antechamber to hell itself. But he was relentless, his grip unbreakable. I continued to fight, thrashing and screaming, but my efforts were futile. He was bigger, stronger, and completely unhinged. He shoved me back into the trophy room, and I stumbled, falling to my knees on the dusty, grimy floor. The stale smell of blood and decay was even more potent now, sickeningly sweet. I could feel the grit and grime digging into my skin. He kicked the door shut behind us with a loud bang that echoed through the silent house. The room was plunged into near darkness, save for the faint light filtering through the grimy window. It was enough to see a silhouette towering over me, a dark, menacing shape against the gloom. "Now," he said, his voice calmer now, more deliberate. "Let us get you comfortable." He still held that braided rope in his hand. My eyes fixated on it, a primal fear seizing me. Restraints. This was it. This was the game he wanted to play. I scrambled backward on my hands and knees, trying to put as much distance between us as possible, my eyes wide with terror. "No. Please, no." I pleaded, my voice cracking, tears stinging my eyes. But he just smiled, that same chilling, predatory grin. He dropped to one knee, mirroring my position, and slowly, deliberately, began to uncoil the rope. Each loop that unwound felt like a tightening around my own throat. The rope was not just a simple piece of twine, it was thick, sturdy, and looked like it had been used many times before. The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. "It is no use fighting, sweetheart," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, almost coaxing, which only made it more terrifying. "You are tired. You are scared. Just relax. It will be over sooner if you just cooperate with this monster." Never, despite his words. I found a renewed surge of adrenaline. I was not going to just give up. I was not going to let him win. I lunged forward, not at him, but past him, towards a shovel I would seen earlier. It was my only chance. But he anticipated my move. Before I could even get to my feet, he snatched my ankle, twisting it with brutal force. A searing pain shot up my leg, and I cried out, collapsing back onto the floor. He pulled me back, dragging me across the dusty floor, my clothes snagging on unseen debris. He moved with an unnerving efficiency, straddling my back, pinning me to the ground. His weight was crushing, suffocating. I struggled, bucking and twisting, but he was too heavy, too strong. I could feel the rough fabric of his clothes against my skin, the faint, sickening scent of him filling my nostrils. "See," he whispered, his breath hot against my ear. "This is much easier when you stop fighting." He grabbed my wrists, pulling them together behind my back. I fought him with every ounce of strength I had left, but my muscles were burning, my energy rapidly depleting. He was tying the rope now, his movements swift and practiced. I could feel the rough fibers digging into my skin, pulling tighter and tighter. "No, let me go. Please." I screamed, my voice raw and desperate. Tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision. My heart was a frantic hummingbird, trying to escape my chest. He ignored my pleas, his focus entirely on the knots. He worked quickly, expertly, and within moments, my wrists were bound tightly behind my back, the rope biting into my flesh. The pain was sharp, but the terror was worse. I was helpless, completely, utterly at his mercy. He then moved my ankles, binding them together with the same ruthless efficiency. I could feel the circulation beginning to cut off, a tingling numbness spreading through my extremities. I was a prisoner, bound and gagged by my own fear. He stood up, towering over me once again, the dim light casting long, grotesque shadows around him. He looked down at me, a triumphant glint in his eyes. "There," he said, his voice laced with satisfaction. Much better. Now we can really play. I lay there, utterly defeated, my body trembling uncontrollably. The cold, hard floor pressed against my cheek, and the smell of decay filled my nostrils. My vision was blurry from tears, but I could still see the dark shapes of the trophies in the open box, mocking me. They were all silent witnesses, just like I was now. He knelt down again, his face close to mine, his breath warm and fetid. You know, I have been thinking about this for a long time, ever since our first encounter. You were different. You had a spark. And I knew, right then, that I had to have you. Not just for a moment, like the others, but for the full experience. He reached out a hand, and I flinched, instinctively trying to pull away, but I could not move. His fingers brushed against my cheek, cold and rough, sending a shiver of revulsion through me. He wiped away a tear with his thumb, a gesture that was sickeningly intimate. "Do not cry," he murmured, his voice surprisingly soft, almost tender, which was somehow more horrifying in his rage. "This is going to be fun. For both of us. A true connection. A shared experience. You will see." He stood up again and walked over to the wooden box. He picked up one of the trophies, a small, tarnished silver locket. He held it up, turning it over in his fingers, his eyes distant, lost in some twisted memory. "This belonged to a girl named Sarah," he said, his voice almost nostalgic. "She was so innocent, so trusting. It was almost too easy. But you are not innocent. Are you? Not anymore. You have seen things. You have fought. That is why you are so much more valuable." My mind was screaming, but no sound escaped my lips. I was suffocating under the weight of my own terror. He was dissecting me, piece by piece, not with knife, but with his words, with his twisted perception of me. He was not just planning to hurt me physically, he was planning to destroy me mentally, to break my spirit, just as he would promised. He put the locket back in the box, then turned to face me again. His eyes were dark, unreadable, but I could feel the intensity of his gaze, piercing through me. "You know, I used to just take them," he said, his voice dropping to a low, confiding tone, as if he were sharing a secret with a friend. But it was never enough. There was no engagement, no real participation. They were just objects, and I realized that is not what I wanted. I wanted a game. I wanted someone to play with me, someone who understood the stakes, someone who chose to come here, even if it was a choice born of desperation. He took a step closer, then another, until he was standing directly over me again. I could feel the tremors of my body intensifying, a desperate, futile attempt to escape. "And you," he said, a triumphant gleam in his eyes, "you chose to come. You found my house. You sought me out. So, in a way, you matched with me, did not you? You accepted the invitation to play my game. And now we play." He knelt down again, his face inches from mine. His eyes were wide, dilated, filled with a terrifying excitement. I could see the reflection of my own terrified face in their depths. "The first rule of our game," he whispered, his voice a chilling caress, "is that you do not get to leave. Not until I say so. And the second rule, well, the second rule is that you are going to learn to love it, just like all the others did." Eventually, he leaned closer still, and I could feel his breath on my face. The sickening smell of him filled my senses, making my stomach churn. I closed my eyes, wishing for unconsciousness, for oblivion, for anything to escape this waking nightmare. But it did not come. I was still agonizingly, terrifyingly awake. "Open your eyes," he commanded, his voice suddenly sharp, cutting through my despair. "Look at me. You need to see this. You need to remember. This is the beginning of our story, yours and mine, and it is going to be a masterpiece." I slowly, reluctantly, opened my eyes. He was still there, his face a mask of twisted pleasure, his eyes burning into mine. My heart was a frozen lump in my chest, and profound, deep terror settled over me. I was truly, utterly lost. This was not just a house, it was a tomb. And I was already buried alive. The game had indeed begun, and I was merely a pawn, bound and helpless, in the hands of a monster. The horror had just opened its maw, and I was staring directly into its depths. My eyes, or whatever served as them now, fixed on the monstrosity below. It was my old body, lying discarded on the cold stone slab, a hollowed-out husk. The skin was pale, almost translucent, and a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through it, like a leaf caught in a phantom breeze. It looked so small, so fragile, so utterly empty. A sickening wave of nausea, a sensation I did not even know this new-formed experience, washed over me. That was me. Or it was me. Now, it was just a shell, a used-up vessel. And then I looked further down, past the slab, past my old, worthless flesh, to what stood over it. A towering, grotesque figure. Its limbs were disproportionately long, ending in what could only be described as massive, clawed hands. The skin, if you could even call it that, was a patchwork of different shades and textures, a Frankenstein's nightmare stitched together with thick, angry seams that pulsed with a faint, unnatural light. My chest, or where my chest should be, was an expanse of coarse, matted hair, beneath which I could feel a powerful, rhythmic thudding of heart, but not my heart. My head was heavy, a misshapen mass, and when I tried to touch it, my new fingers, thick and blunt, scraped against something hard and bony, like a ridge of bone. It was me. I was that. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, even though my new body felt no pain in conventional sense. This was not just a new body, it was an abomination, a mockery of life. My consciousness, my very soul, had been ripped from its familiar home and crammed into this nightmare. A guttural sound escaped my new throat, a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through my entire frame. It was not a sound I made. It was a sound it made. And yet, I felt the reverberations, the raw power behind it. Panic, cold and absolute, surged through me, a primal scream trapped within this monstrous form. I tried to move, to recoil, to simply stop existing, but my new limbs were clumsy, uncoordinated. I stumbled backward, the sheer mass of me causing the ground to shake with a dull thud. The stone walls of Lena's basement seemed to loom even higher, and the low ceiling, which had once felt oppressively close, was now dangerously near my new head. Lena stood across the room, observing me with that same clinical detachment, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. She held the glowing device, the one that had stolen my consciousness, like a conductor's baton. Her eyes, usually so cold, now sparkled with triumphant, almost manic glee. "Subject is fully integrated," she murmured, her voice a chillingly calm counterpoint to the roaring chaos inside my head. "Initial motor control appears rudimentary, as expected, but the transfer was a complete success. Project Chimera is a triumph. A triumph." She called this a triumph. I tried to speak, to scream her name, to demand an explanation, an end to this horror. But only another guttural growl tore its way out of my throat, raw and meaningless. My new tongue felt thick, too large in my mouth, and my teeth were different, sharper, longer. My gaze fell back to my old body, lying there, so still. And then I saw it, the faint, barely visible scar on its left wrist, a tiny memento from a childhood accident. It was undeniably mine. That was my body, my old human, beautiful body. And now it was just garbage. Rage, pure and undiluted, ignited within me, burning away the fear for a moment. This was not just a violation. It was an annihilation of everything I was. Lena had stolen my life, my identity, my very form, and replaced it with this. I lunged forward, or at least, I tried to. My new body responded with a clumsy, powerful surge. My long, clawed hand shot out, not toward Lena, but toward the stone slab where my old body lay. I do not know if I intended to protect it, to destroy it, or simply to touch it one last time. But my aim was off. My massive hand slammed into the slab with a deafening crack, splintering the ancient stone and sending shards flying. My old body, with a sickening, almost rubbery flop, was thrown to the side, landing with a soft thud on the cold floor. Lena did not flinch. She just watched, her smile widening. Remarkable strength, she noted, as of observing a fascinating specimen in a lab. Even without full control, the core musculature is exceptional. The sound of my old body hitting the floor, the casual disregard with which it had been tossed aside, was the final straw. The rage intensified, a hot, consuming fire. I turned my monstrous head toward Lena, my new eyes, which felt too large and too sensitive, focusing on her. She seemed so small, so fragile, standing there with her glowing device. A wave of primal instinct, a hunger for retribution, surged through me. I wanted to tear her apart, to crush her, to make her feel even a fraction of the terror and agony she had inflicted upon me. I took a step, then another, the floor rumbling under my immense weight. Each movement was a struggle, a fight against the unfamiliarity of these new limbs, but the sheer force of my will, fueled by hatred, propelled me forward. My new claws scraped against the stone floor, creating a horrendous screech that echoed through the basement. Lena finally showed a flicker of something other than clinical interest, a hint of caution. She raised the glowing device. "Do not be foolish." "Subject," she said, her voice still calm, but with an edge of warning. "You are still under my control. A simple neural inhibitor pulse, and you will be nothing more than a puppet." I did not care. I would not be her puppet. I would not be anything she wanted me to be. I was a monster. Yes, but I was my monster. With another roar, I launched myself at her. It was not graceful, it was not precise, but it was powerful. My long arms flailed, my claws extended. Lena, surprisingly agile for someone so focused on science, darted backward, narrowly avoiding my grasp. The glowing device in her hand pulsed, and I felt a sudden, agonizing jolt, a searing pain that shot through my new brain. It was not like a normal pain, it was a deep, invasive ache that felt like my very thoughts were being ripped apart. I staggered, clutching my head with one massive, clawed hand. The pain was immense, overwhelming, threatening to shatter my consciousness. Lena was right. She could control me. She could break me. But something within me, something deep and primal, refused to yield. This body might be hers, but my mind, my will, was still mine. I fought against the inhibitor, pushing back against the invisible force that sought to subjugate me. It was like trying to hold back a tidal wave with my bare hands. But I would not give up, not after everything. As the pain subsided slightly, leaving behind a dull throb, I realized Lena was speaking again, her voice a low hum against the ringing in my ears. A strong will, she mused, adjusting something on the device. Even in this form. Fascinating, but ultimately futile. She raised the device again, and this time, I knew what was coming. I could not let her do it again. I could not let her turn me into her personal toy. My eyes darted around the basement, searching for anything, any advantage. My gaze fell on the heavy metal workbench in the corner, laden with Lena's tools, her vile instruments. It was sturdy, bolted to the floor. But this new body was strong, with a surge of desperate energy. I turned and slammed my shoulder into the workbench. The metal shrieked in protest. The bolts groaned, and with a final violent heave, the entire bench, tearing free from the wall, crashed to the floor with a deafening clang that echoed to the entire house. Tools scattered, glass beakers shattered, and a thick cloud of dust billowed up. Lena paused, her eyes widening slightly in genuine surprise. "Impossible," she breathed. That momentary distraction was all I needed before she could react. I lunged again, not at her, but at the wall beside her. My massive claws dug into the cold, damp stone, tearing away chunks of mortar and rock as if they were made of clay. I roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury, and pulled. The wall groaned, cracks spiderwebbing across its ancient surface. The foundation of the house itself seemed to tremble. Lena screamed, a sound of genuine fear this time, and stumbled backward, dropping the glowing device. It hit the stone floor with a dull thud, sparks flying, and then went dark. The pain, the mental anguish, instantly receded. The connection was broken. I was free, or at least, I was no longer directly controlled. I did not hesitate. With another tremendous pull, the section of the wall I had attacked crumbled inward, revealing a gaping hole, a crude, jagged doorway to the outside world. A rush of cold night air, smelling of damp earth and distant pine, washed over me. It was a scent of freedom. Without a second thought, I scrambled through the newly created opening. My monstrous body scraped against the rough edges of the broken wall, sending more debris raining down. But I felt no pain, only a burning urgency to escape. I was out. I was finally out of that hellish basement. The night air was a shock to my new senses. The moon was a brilliant, silver disk in the inky sky, casting long, distorted shadows. The trees, which had always seemed so comforting from my old perspective, now loomed like skeletal giants. Every rustle of leaves, every distant chirp of cricket was amplified, assaulting my new hypersensitive ears. I stumbled through Lena's overgrown backyard, my long, clumsy limbs struggling to navigate the uneven terrain. The grass, the bushes, everything felt alien under my massive, clawed feet. I could feel the earth tremble with each heavy step, a constant reminder of my monstrous weight. I just kept moving, driven by a primal need to put as much distance as possible between myself and Lena. I could hear her shouts from the house, frantic and enraged, but they were fading behind me. I crashed through Lena's fence, splintering the old wood as if it were kindling, and burst into the dense woods that bordered her property. The trees here were even thicker, their branches intertwining to form a dark, oppressive canopy. It was a haven, but also a cage. The darkness of the woods was profound, but my new eyes seemed to pierce through it with unnatural clarity. I could see every gnarled root, every fallen leaf, every tiny insect scuttling across the forest floor. It was too much. The world was too sharp, too detailed, too loud. My senses were overwhelmed, a constant barrage of information that my human mind struggled to process. I ran, or rather, I lumbered deeper and deeper into the forest. Branches whipped against my coarse skin, but I felt nothing. My new body was impervious, a living fortress. Yet, inside, my human consciousness was screaming, tearing itself apart. Where was I going? What was I doing? I was a monster, a creature of nightmares. I could not go back to my old life. I could not face anyone. The sheer horror of my appearance, the revulsion it would inspire, was a crushing weight. I finally collapsed in a small clearing, hidden by a thicket of thorny bushes. My monstrous body crumpled to the ground, sending a shower of loose dirt and leaves into the air. I lay there, panting, the strange new rhythm of my massive lungs filling the silence of the woods. My chest heaved, a powerful, almost mechanical motion. And then, I looked at my hands again. They were enormous, covered in the same coarse, patchwork skin as the rest of me. The claws were long, wickedly sharp, tipped with a dark, almost black substance. These were not human hands. These were weapons. A sob, raw and broken, tore its way from my throat. It was a human sound, a sound of utter despair, but it was muffled, distorted by the monstrous vocal cords it passed through. Tears, hot and stinging, welled up in my eyes, blurring my vision. But even my tears felt alien, thick and viscous. This was not just a new body. It was a new existence, a cursed existence. The hours that followed were a blur of self-loathing and desperate attempts to understand what I had become. I tried to move my fingers, to clench my fists, to regain some semblance of control. My new muscles were immense, powerful, but they did not obey my commands with the fluid ease of my old body. It was like driving a tank with a bicycle's steering wheel. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky in hues of bruised purple and angry red, I realized another terrifying truth. My new body had a hunger, not for food, not in the way a human body craves sustenance. This was a deeper, more primal urge, a gnawing emptiness that began in the pit of my monstrous stomach and radiated outward, a low, insistent thrumming that threatened to drown out my own thoughts. What did this body need? What did Project Chimera do? Lena had called it integral. What did that mean for me? I tried to ignore it, to push it down, but the hunger grew stronger, more demanding. It was not pain, but it was a discomfort so profound it bordered on agony. It felt like my very cells were screaming for something. I spent the next few days in a state of constant terror and confusion, hiding deep within the woods, avoiding any signs of human civilization. The hunger grew, a constant, oppressive presence that threatened to consume my sanity. I tried to eat plants, berries, anything I could find, but my new digestive system seemed to reject them, spitting them back up with a violent retch. This body was not designed for berries. One night, the hunger became unbearable. It was a primal scream from the depths of this monstrous form, overriding all my human instincts, all my fear. I lumbered to the darkness, driven by an instinct I did not understand, could not control. My new senses were on high alert, my ears picking up every rustle, every snap of a twig. My eyes, adapted to the dark, scanned the forest floor, searching. And then I saw it, a deer grazing peacefully in a small clearing. Its eyes, wide and innocent, reflected the moonlight. A wave of revulsion, a deep human disgust, washed over me. I was a human. I did not hunt. I did not kill. But the hunger, the monstrous, overwhelming hunger, was too strong. It was like an external force, seizing control of my limbs, propelling me forward. The deer looked up, startled, its ears swiveling. It saw me, this hulking, grotesque silhouette against the moonlit trees, and let out a terrified bleat. It bolted, but I was faster, impossibly fast. My long limbs covered the ground with terrifying speed, a blur of motion. I did not think. I did not plan. I just moved. The chase was brutal, primal, a horrifying dance of predator and prey. And then it was over. The act itself was a blur of teeth and claws and raw, animalistic force. When it was done, when the deer lay still and lifeless beneath my massive hands, a sickening wave of warmth flooded through my monstrous body. The hunger, for the first time since my transformation, receded. It was not gone entirely, but it was dulled, satiated. I stood there, covered in gore, the metallic tang of blood filling my new nostrils. My human mind was screaming, recoiling in horror from what I had done, from what I had become. I had killed. I had butchered an innocent animal. I was a monster, not just in appearance, but in action. I sank to my knees, burying my face in my clawed hands, trying to blot out the sight, the smell, the terrible reality of it all. I wept again those thick, alien tears for the life I had lost, for the humanity I had sacrificed. Days turned into weeks. I became a ghost in the woods, a creature of legend. I learned to move silently, despite my size, to blend into the shadows. I learned to hunt, driven by that relentless, monstrous hunger. Each kill was a fresh agony for my human soul, a further descent into the abyss. But the alternative was a gnawing, all-consuming pain that threatened to tear my new body apart. I also started to notice other changes. My skin, which had been a patchwork, seemed to be slowly fusing, the seams becoming less pronounced, as if this new form was becoming more cohesive. My claws seemed to grow longer, sharper. My senses became even more acute, allowing me to hear the whisper of a mouse from hundreds of feet away, to smell the distant scent of a human. And that is when the true terror began. Not just the terror of what I was, but the terror of what Lena had created. One evening, as I was huddled in a hidden cavity I'd found, the distinct scent of Lena hit my nostrils. It was faint at first, carried on the wind, but unmistakable. That clinical, almost sterile scent, tinged with something metallic and chemical. She was looking for me. My heart, or whatever monstrous organ beat in my chest, hammered against my ribs. Fear, cold and absolute, gripped me. Not just fear of being recaptured, but fear of what she would do to me if she found me, or what she would do to others. She was a monster in human skin, and I was her ultimate creation. I retreated deeper into the cave, my body tensing, ready to fight or flee. I could hear sounds now, faint but growing louder, the crunch of leaves, the snap of twigs, the distant murmur of voices. She was not alone. Through a narrow crevice in the cave wall, I could see them. Lena, dressed in practical outdoor gear, holding a sophisticated-looking tracking device that pulsed with a faint green light. And with her, two other figures, burly men in tactical gear, carrying tranquilizer rifles. They were her muscle, her enforcers. It is close. Lena's voice, sharp and clear, carried through the night. The signal is strong here. It has been feeding. The biosignature is robust. My blood ran cold. Biosignature. Feeding. She knew. She knew what I had become, what I had to do to survive. This was all part of her design. Are you sure it is safe to approach? Doctor, one of the men asked, his voice rough. That thing, it is not natural. Lena scoffed. It is perfectly natural in its own way, a marvel of genetic engineering. And it is not a thing, Mr. Briggs. It is subject chimera. And yes, it is safe. I designed it. I know its parameters. It is just a little more self-aware than anticipated. Self-aware. She found that fascinating. To me, it was a living hell. I could hear them moving closer, their footsteps heavy. The cave was not as hidden as I thought. I had to move. I could not let them take me. I could not go back to that basement. My new body, for all its monstrous power, was still clumsy in confined spaces. I squeezed the narrow opening at the back of the cave, scratching my coarse skin against the rough rock. It led to a steep, winding path that descended into a deeper ravine. As I climbed down, I could hear Lena's voice, closer now. It is in here. Spread out, but be careful. We need it intact. I moved as fast as I could, the darkness of the ravine providing some cover. The air grew colder, damper. I could hear the rush of a hidden stream at the bottom. Suddenly, a blinding light flared above me. One of the men had found the cave entrance and was shining a powerful flashlight down into the ravine. There it is, he yelled, big as a damn bear. A tranquilizer dart whizzed past my head, impacting the rock face with a sharp thwack. I roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated defiance, and scrambled faster. My claws found purchase on the damp rock, propelling me downward. More darts followed, some grazing my thick hide, but the tranquilizer had no immediate effect. This body was too large, too robust. It would take a massive dose to even slow me down. I reached the bottom of the ravine, splashing into the icy water of the stream. The cold was a shock, but also a momentary clarity. I had to fight. I could not run forever. Lena and her men were at the lip of the ravine, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. She was holding a different device now, smaller, more compact. Do not engage directly, she shouted. Just keep it contained. I am activating the neural dampener. A low hum filled the air, and then a familiar, agonizing pressure began to build in my head. It was the same pain as before, but magnified, intensified. It felt like a vice was tightening around my brain, squeezing the very life out of my thoughts. I stumbled, clutching my head, a guttural groan escaping my throat. This was it. She was going to shut me down. She was going to turn me into a mindless puppet. But something had changed since that first encounter. The hunger, the constant low thrumming of my monstrous body had subtly altered me. The primal instincts were stronger now, interwoven with my human consciousness. My body was reacting not just to the pain, but to the threat. A furious, animalistic roar tore from my throat, a sound that seemed to shake the very trees. I was not just fighting Lena's control, I was fighting for my very existence, for the last vestiges of my humanity. I looked up at Lena, her face illuminated by the harsh glare of her device, a look of smug triumph on her features. And in that moment, something snapped. The pain was still there, immense and crippling, but it was no longer overwhelming. It fueled me. It became a part of my rage. With a desperate surge of strength, I launched myself up the sheer rock face of the ravine, ignoring the darts that pinged off my tough hide. My claws, now even sharper, dug deep into the stone, tearing away chunks as I scaled the wall with terrifying speed. Lena's eyes widened in horror. "It is resisting the dampener," she shrieked. "Increase the frequency. Fire! Fire!" The men opened fire with their tranquilizer rifles, a barrage of darts whizzing past me. One hit my shoulder, another my leg, but the effect was minimal. My monstrous body was a fortress of muscle and bone. I reached the top of the ravine in a matter of seconds, bursting out of the darkness like a demon from hell. The men screamed, dropping their rifles, their faces contorted in pure terror. They had seen me up close now, truly seen the abomination Lena had created. I did not hesitate. I did not think. I was a force of nature, driven by an instinct for survival. My massive clawed hand swept out, catching one of the men and sending him flying into a tree with a sickening crunch. He fell to the ground, unconscious. The other man, paralyzed by fear, simply stood there, staring at me with wide, unseeing eyes. Lena, however, was already reacting. She was adjusting her device, her fingers flying across the controls. "Subject is unstable," she yelled, her voice laced with panic. "Initiating full system shutdown. Prepare for impact." The hum of the neural dampener intensified, becoming a piercing shriek that vibrated through my bones. The pain in my head became a white-hot inferno, threatening to incinerate my very consciousness. This was not just pain, it was an attempt to erase me. But I had come too far. I had lost too much. I would not let her win. With a final, earth-shattering roar, I lunged at Lena. She shrieked, dropping her device and stumbling backward. My massive hand, fueled by a rage born of unimaginable suffering, closed around her. I did not crush her. Not yet. I lifted her, her feet dangling helplessly above the ground, her face pale with terror. Her eyes, which had once held such cold, clinical disdain, were now wide with pure, unadulterated fear. She looked at me, truly looked at me, the monster she had made. You can't," she gasped, her voice choked with fear. "I created you. I control you." Another growl rumbled in my chest, a deep, resonant sound of contempt. Control me? She had lost control the moment she ripped me from my old body. She had lost control the moment I broke free from her basement. The neural dampener was still shrieking, still trying to tear me apart from the inside, but I fought through it. I focused all my remaining human will, all my monster strength, into one final desperate act. I lifted Lena higher, her body writhing in my grasp. Her eyes pleaded, but I saw only the reflection of my own monstrous face in them. And then I slammed her, not into the ground, but into the device she had dropped. The small, compact device, still humming with its destructive frequency, shattered on impact, sparks flying, wires snapping. The high-pitched shriek of the neural dampener died, replaced by a sudden, profound silence. Lena lay still, broken and unmoving, amidst the shattered remains of her ultimate weapon. The silence was deafening. The pain in my head receded, leaving behind only a dull ache, a phantom echo of the torment. I was free, truly free. But at what cost? I looked down at my massive clawed hands, still stained with blood, both from the deer and from Lena's men. I looked at the unconscious man lying by the tree, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. I looked at Lena, motionless on the ground. The other man, the one who had been paralyzed by fear, was gone. He had fled into the woods, his terror a palpable thing. I was alone, alone with what I had done, alone with what I had become. The hunger returned, a low, insistent thrumming in my gut, reminding me of the price of my survival. This body still needed to feed. This body was still a monster. I stumbled away from the scene, leaving behind the wreckage of Lena's ambition and the broken remnants of her control. I walked deeper into the woods, into the shadows, a creature of the night, forever exiled from the world I once knew. My human mind, the last flickering ember of my old self, understood the terrible truth. Lena was gone, but the monster remained. I was that monster, and there was no going back. There was no escape. I had survived, but I had lost everything that made me human. And as the moon cast its pale, cold light through the trees, I knew with a chilling certainty that this was just the beginning of my new, horrific existence. The Project Chimera was complete, and I, its integral part, was now unleashed upon a world that would never understand and could never forgive the abomination that walked among them, forever haunted by the memory of a normal life, a normal body that was no longer needed. My old body, lying discarded in Lena's basement, was gone, but I, the monster, was here, and I was hungry, and that truly was the most terrifying horror of all. It has been months since that night, but time does not heal everything. It just blurs the edges, like a bad photograph. The details are not as sharp, but the feeling, that cold, gut-wrenching dread, it is still there, a constant underneath the surface of my skin. Every shadow looks like him. Every unexpected noise sends a jolt of ice through my veins. I jump at my own reflection sometimes, catching a glimpse of the haunted eyes staring back. That girl who swiped right on Mark. She is gone. She was naive, trusting. I miss her. Sometimes, the police were helpful in their way. They believed me. They found his car, abandoned miles from where I would crashed it. The trunk was still open, the bloody blanket still there, just like I said. They found my blood, his blood. But Mark, he was gone, vanished into thin air like a ghost. They searched the woods. They put out an APB. They checked hospitals. Nothing. It was like he would never existed, except for the lingering horror he left behind. They told me I was safe. They told me he would not come back. But how could they know? They did not see his eyes, that predatory grin. They did not feel his hands on me, the zip ties in his grip. I know he is out there. I feel in my bones. Every time the wind rustles the leaves outside my window. Every time a car slows down a little too much on my street, my heart pounds a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I have installed new locks, a security system, motion sensor lights. My apartment, once a cozy sanctuary, now feels like a fortress, and I am just waiting for the siege. Therapy helps, or at least that is what they tell me. I talk about it. I process it. I try to regain some semblance of normalcy. But how do you go back to normal when you know monsters walk among us, wearing charming smiles and offering stargazing dates? Every man I meet, every friendly face, is scrutinized. Is he like Mark? Is he hiding something? The world, once full of possibilities, now feels like a minefield. One afternoon, a few weeks after the incident, I was finally strong enough to go through the clothes I would have been wearing that night. They were still in a plastic evidence bag the police had returned, stiff with dried mud and, God, a faint metallic smell that made my stomach churn. My therapist said it would be a good step, a way to reclaim some control. I pulled out my ripped jeans, the tattered jacket. Each item brought back a fresh wave of nausea, a flash of memory, the biting cold, the desperate scramble, the feel of branches tearing at my skin. As I was about to toss them all into a garbage bag, I could not bear to wash them. To touch them any more than I had in my hand brushed against something heavy in the pocket of my jacket. I froze. What could it be? I had not put anything in there. My fingers fumbled, my heart already starting to pick up speed. I pulled it out. It was a keyring, a plain, silver keyring with 2 keys attached. One was a standard house key, the kind you would see on any front door. The other was a bit smaller, like for a padlock or a shed. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at them, my mind racing. These were not my keys. I had my own set, and they looked nothing like this. And then a memory, sharp and cold, pierced to the fog of trauma. When I would stab Mark's leg, I had not just used a key. I would use his car keys. They were still in the ignition when he would pull me out of the ditch, and in a desperate last-ditch effort, I would grab them. But I remembered the feel of them, a heavy clump of metal, not just 1 or 2. He must have had a whole set. And in the chaos, in my frantic escape, when I would yank them out of his leg and thrown them, maybe some of them had gotten stuck in my jacket pocket. Or maybe when I would fallen into the ditch, when he would have been on top of me, I would somehow, unknowingly, snag these from his person. My blood ran cold. These were his keys. Mark's house keys. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He had a home, a place he went back to, a place where he probably kept things. Evidence. Maybe other things, other people. The thought was sickening. My first instinct was to call the police, to tell them I would found these, to hand them over. But then a different, darker thought began to form, a dangerous little seed of curiosity blooming in the fertile ground of my trauma. The police had not found him. They had no leads. What if these keys were the key, no pun intended, to finding him, to understanding him, to finally getting some answers, some closure? The idea was insane, reckless, suicidal even. But a part of me, the part that had been so utterly violated and powerless, craved control. It craved knowledge. It wanted to stare into the abyss and not just flinch away. I spent days wrestling with it. The keys sat on my nightstand, a constant, silent accusation. They glinted under the lamp, a metallic whisper of danger. I researched, discreetly at first, then more intently. I remembered the general direction we were driven. It was a rural area, heavily wooded, outside the city limits. I tried to recall any landmarks, any specific turns Mark had made. It was a blur, a terrifying montage of trees and dark roads, but a few details stuck. A specific, unusually shaped rock formation near a turnoff. A dilapidated barn. I knew, logically, that this was a terrible idea. My therapist would have a heart attack. My friends would tell me I was crazy. But the thought of him out there, living his life, perhaps planning his next move, while I cowered in my apartment, felt unbearable. I needed to know. I needed to see. One rainy Tuesday, when the sky was a bruised purple and the world felt suitably grim, I made a decision. I wrote a note just in case, detailing what I was doing and where I was going, and left it for my best friend to find if I did not check in by a certain time. I packed a small bag, my phone fully charged, a portable charger, a flashlight, a small utility knife I would bought for self-defense, a first aid kit, and a can of pepper spray. My heart was a frantic drum solo in my chest, but there was also a strange, cold resolve. I got in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I drove the familiar route out of the city, past the last gas stations and fast food joints, until the buildings thinned out and the trees began to close in. Each mile felt like a step deeper into a nightmare. I was actively creating for myself. I drove slowly, trying to retrace our path. It was harder than I thought. Everything looked different in the daylight, and without the terror-induced adrenaline, my memory felt unreliable. I passed the spot where he would pulled over, where I would found the trunk. The police tape was gone, but the ground still looked disturbed, a dark stain on the earth. I shuddered, forcing myself to look away. After an hour of aimless driving, just as I was about to give up, I saw it, the rock formation. It was exactly as I remembered, a jagged, almost human-like shape rising from the roadside. My breath hitched. This was it. I remembered him turning off the main road here, onto a smaller, unpaved track. I took a deep breath and turned, the gravel crunching under my tires. The road was narrow, overgrown, and quickly became less of a road and more of a path. Branches scraped against the sides of my car, making a sound like fingernails on a blackboard. The tree-line was dense, blocking out most of the sky, plunging the path into a perpetual twilight. My hands were slick with sweat. After what felt like an eternity, the path opened up slightly, through a break in the trees. I saw it. A house. It was exactly what I would imagine, and yet somehow worse. A two-story structure, older, with faded clapboard siding that had once been a dark green, but was now peeling and streaked with grime. It was set back from the road, almost hidden, surrounded by overgrown bushes and towering skeletal trees. There was a detached garage, equally dilapidated, in a small, unkempt yard. No other houses were visible. It was utterly isolated. My stomach twisted. This was it. This was Mark's lair. I parked my car a good distance away, hidden behind a thick cluster of pines. I grabbed my bag, checked the pepper spray in my hand, and started walking, each step deliberate, cautious. The air was heavy, still, and the only sound was the rustle of my own clothes and the frantic beat of my heart. As I got closer, the house seemed to loom, a silent sentinel of dread. The windows were dark, like empty eye sockets. The front porch sagged, its paint long gone. There was a mailbox, rusty and leaning, with no name visible. Just a number, faded but legible 13. Of course. I approached the front door, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. It was old brass, tarnished. I tried it. Locked. My breath hitched. This was it. The moment of truth. I pulled out the house key. It felt heavy and cold in my palm. I hesitated, my mind screaming at me to turn back, to run, to forget this madness. But the urge, the need to know, was too strong. I slid the key into the lock. It slid in perfectly. A sickening click echoed in the silence as I turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a gaping maw of darkness. A musty, damp smell, like old earth and something else, something vaguely metallic, wafted out. I pulled out my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing a narrow hallway, peeling wallpaper, and a staircase leading up into the shadows. "Hello," I whispered, my voice barely audible, a pathetic little sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. No answer. Of course not. I stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind me. The click of the lock, a final, irreversible decision. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Every instinct screamed danger, but I pushed it down. I had to see. The living room was to my left. My flashlight beam swept across dusty, draped furniture. White sheets covered everything, like shrouds over forgotten bodies. The air was thick with the smell of disuse. It felt like a museum of a life that had been put on hold, or perhaps a life that had ended. I walked through the house, each step tentative, my senses on high alert. The kitchen was equally desolate, a single, flickering fluorescent light hanging precariously from the ceiling. A few dirty dishes were stacked in the sink, covered in a thin layer of dust. Everything here felt abandoned, but not for long. Not truly. Upstairs, the feeling intensified. The floorboards creaked under my weight, each grown a potential betrayer. There were 3 bedrooms. The first 2 were empty, just more dusty sheets covering unseen furniture. but the third. As I pushed open the door to the third bedroom, a different smell hit me, faint but unmistakable, the coppery tang of blood. My breath caught in my throat. I raised my flashlight, my hand shaking so violently the beam danced across the walls. The room was bare, save for a single twin-size mattress on the floor, stripped of its sheets. On the wall above it, something was smeared, dark, dried, unmistakably blood. My stomach lurched. This was not just a house. This was a place where he brought people. I backed away slowly, my mind reeling. This was worse than I could have imagined. This confirmed everything. He was not just a random attacker. He was a monster with a lair, a system. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to move, to get out. As I turned to leave the room, my flashlight beam swept over something on the floor, tucked away in a corner, a small wooden box. My curiosity, morbid and dangerous, pulled me towards it. I knelt, my heart pounding. My fingers brushed against the lid. It was not locked. I opened it. Inside, neatly arranged, were several small, delicate items. A silver locket, a single pearl earring, a child's barrette, a thin gold wedding band. My blood ran cold, colder than it had been all night. These were not just mementos. These were trophies from other victims. A wave of nausea washed over me. I slammed the box shut, my hands trembling. I had to get out. Now, this was not just about closure anymore. It was about pure, unadulterated terror. He was real. This was real. I stumbled out of the room, down the stairs, my eyes darting everywhere. Every shadow seemed to twist. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. I reached the front door, my hand fumbling for the lock. The key was still in it. I turned it, the click echoing loudly in the silent house. I pulled the door open, desperate for fresh air, for the sight of the outside world, for anything but the suffocating dread of this place. But as the door swung open, a figure stepped out from behind the overgrown bushes to the side of the porch. Mark. My blood turned to ice. My scream died in my throat, a strangled gasp. He was there, standing on the porch, a few feet from me. He looked exactly the same. The same kind eyes, the same well-groomed hair, the same casual clothes. But the smile was different. It was slow, deliberate, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the smile of a predator who had just cornered his prey. I knew you would come, he said, his voice calm, almost conversational, like we were old friends meeting for coffee. I knew you could not resist. My mind raced, trying to process, to understand. How? How did he know? He took a step closer, and my eyes darted to his hand. He was holding something. A small, familiar object. My house keys. You left these in my car, he continued, his voice still unervingly calm. When you drove off, remember. Funny how things come full circle. My mind reeled. He had my keys. He would known. He would been waiting. And these, he said, his eyes flicking down to my hand, where I was still clutching his key, the one I would use to unlock his door. You picked these up in the struggle. Did not you? A little souvenir. I figured you would be curious. Most people are, after an experience like ours. He chuckled, a low, chilling sound that made my skin crawl. I left them for you. A breadcrumb. A little invitation. He had let me take his keys. He had known I would come. This was not a discovery on my part. It was a trap, meticulously laid, and I had walked right into it. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was not the hunter, I was still the hunted. And he had been playing me all along. You see, he said, taking another slow step, closing the distance between us. I like to finish what I start. And you, my dear, are an unfinished masterpiece. He reached into his pocket. My heart leaped into my throat. I knew what he was reaching for. The zip ties. My hand, still clutching his key, tightened. My other hand instinctively went for the pepper spray in my bag, but my fingers were shaking too much, fumbling with the zipper. He pulled out the zip ties, a coil of black plastic. He smiled. No running this time. No dark woods to hide in. Just you and me and my cozy little home. Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. But beneath it, a sliver of defiance sparked. I had escaped him once. I could do it again. You are not getting me, I said, my voice shaking but firm. He laughed. Oh, I think I am. He lunged. My training, the self-defense classes I would taken after that night, kicked in. I reacted on instinct. I did not try to run into the woods. I knew he was faster, knew the terrain better. I ran back into the house. He was momentarily surprised, giving me a precious second. I slammed the front door shut, twisting the lock with his key. It would not hold him for long, but it bought me time. I bolted to the living room, knocking over one of the draped pieces of furniture, sending a cloud of dust into the air. My flashlight beam danced wildly, disorienting me. I heard his heavy footsteps on the porch, then a crash as he hit the door. He was strong. It would not hold. I sprinted into the kitchen, my eyes frantically searching for anything at all. A knife block sat on the counter, still dusty from disuse. I grabbed the largest one, a chef's knife, its blade glinting dully in the dim light. It felt heavy, cold, and strangely empowering in my hand. The front door splintered with another crash. I heard him grunt, then the distinct sound of wood tearing. He was coming. I did not wait. I did not want to be trapped in the kitchen. I ran for the back door, hoping against hope there was one. There was a rickety screen door, and beyond it, a small, overgrown yard. I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers clumsy with terror. It finally clicked open. I burst through the back door, tearing through the screen, and launched myself into the overgrown yard. The air was cool, damp, and smelled of wet earth and dying leaves. You can't escape me. His voice roared from inside the house, closer now. I did not look back. I ran. The yard was a tangle of weeds and thorny bushes, tearing at my clothes, scratching my skin. I heard the back door crash open behind me. He was right on my heels. I glanced over my shoulder. He was there, a dark silhouette against the dim light of the kitchen, gaining on me. He was not even breathing heavily. My ankle, still not fully healed from the last escape, screamed in protest. I pushed through the pain, fueled by pure adrenaline. I scanned the yard, desperate. There was a dilapidated garage. It was a long shot, but it was cover. I veered towards it, pushing through a thicket of thorny bushes. The garage door was half open, sagging on its hinges. I squeezed through the gap, pulling the door shut behind me, the rusty metal groaning in protest. It was pitch black inside, a suffocating darkness that pressed on me. I fumbled for my phone, but my hands were shaking too much. I heard his footsteps outside, circling the garage. "Come on out, little mouse," he taunted, his voice closer now, just outside the thin wooden walls. There's nowhere to hide. I pressed myself against the wall, the chef's knife clutched in my hand, its point trembling. The air was thick with the smell of oil, gasoline, and something else, something foul and metallic. My eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom. The garage was packed with junk. Old tools, rusty machinery, stacks of yellowed newspapers. And in the corner, partially covered by a tarp, something large and dark. My breath hitched. I crept closer, my heart pounding. I pulled back the tarp. Underneath, strapped to a workbench, was a gurney. And on the gurney, a form, covered by a sheet. My stomach rebelled. I clamped a hand over my mouth, stifling a scream. This was not just a place for trophies. This was a workshop. A loud bang on the garage door made me jump. He was trying to force his way in, though it groaned under the assault. I had to move. I had to fight. I looked around frantically. A shelf above the workbench held jars of screws, nuts, and bolts. A can of gasoline sat on the floor, next to a pile of oily rags. A spark plug. My mind raced, trying to piece together a plan. The door splintered again. He was going to break through any second. I grabbed the can of gasoline, my hands slick with sweat. I pulled off the cap, the fumes instantly filling the air. I heard him let out a frustrated growl as the door held for another moment. He burst through, a dark, menacing silhouette framed by the faint light from outside. He saw me, saw the gasoline can in my hand. His eyes widened, a flicker of surprise in their depths. "Stay back." I screamed, my voice raw. He hesitated, a predatory glint in his eyes. "You would not. Try me." I snarled, my fear momentarily replaced by a cold, desperate fury. He smirked. "You are not a killer. You do not know what I am." I retorted, and in that moment, I realized it was true. I did not know. This was not the girl who swiped right anymore. This was someone else, forged in fire. He took a step. I did not hesitate. I threw the gasoline. It arced through the air, splashing across his chest, his arms, his face. He cried out, a surprised roar, as the cold liquid soaked him. The smell was overpowering. He stumbled back, wiping at his eyes, momentarily blinded. This was my chance. My eyes darted to the shelf. The spark plug. I grabbed it, my fingers fumbling. I had seen someone do this once, in a movie, a desperate last-ditch effort. I lunged, not at him, but at the pile of oily rags on the floor. I struck the spark plug against the concrete, praying for a spark. Nothing. My heart plummeted. He recovered, shaking his head, his eyes burning with rage. "You little bitch," he roared, lunging for me. I screamed, swinging the chef's knife wildly. It connected, a dull thud, against his arm. He cried out, a guttural sound of pain and fury, and stumbled back again. But he was still coming. He was a force of nature, relentless. I hit the spark plug against the concrete again, harder this time. A tiny, fleeting spark. And then a whoosh. The rags ignited. A small flame, then a larger one, licking at the gasoline-soaked floor. The fumes in the garage were thick. He saw the fire, his eyes widening in horror. He was covered in gasoline. He knew what that meant. "No!" He screamed, backing away, tripping over a pile of junk. The fire spread rapidly, engulfing the rags, licking at the wooden walls. The heat was instant, intense. The smell of burning oil and gasoline filled the air, acrid and suffocating. I scrambled back, away from the flames, towards a broken garage door. He was still struggling, trying to get away from the growing inferno, his face a mask of terror. I did not wait. I pushed through the shattered door, gasping for air, my lungs burning. The night air hit my face, cold and blessed. I ran. I did not look back. I just ran, stumbling through the overgrown yard, toward my car, towards any semblance of safety. The sound of the fire, the crackling wood, the faint, desperate screams, faded behind me as I put distance between myself and that inferno. I did not stop until I reached my car. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely get the key in the ignition. I started the engine, threw the car into reverse, and sped down the gravel path, leaving the burning house and Mark behind. I did not call the police until I was miles away, on a main road, my phone almost dead. My voice was hoarse, my body trembling uncontrollably. I told them what happened, about the fire, about Mark. They dispatched units. They found the house, or what was left of it, a smoldering ruin. They found remains inside. Human remains. They could not be sure it was him, not without DNA, but they said it was highly probable. The fire had been intense. They said I was a hero, a survivor. They said I had finally stopped him, but I did not feel like a hero. I feel change, scarred. The image of his face, contorted in terror as the flames licked at him, is burned into my memory, a permanent fixture. The smell of gasoline and smoke still clings to my clothes, to my hair, to my very soul. I do not know if it is truly over. They found a body, but what if it was not him? What if he somehow escaped, a phoenix rising from the ashes of his own depravity? The thought haunts me, a chilling whisper in the dead of night. I still lock my doors. I still check the shadows. The world is still hunting ground, and I was almost, but this time, I fought back, and a part of me, the part that had been so utterly broken, feels a dark, dangerous strength. A strength born of terror, yes, but strength nonetheless. I survived, and I will keep surviving, even if it means living in a world where the monsters are always just one swipe, one kind smile away. It all started, as so many things do these days, with a swipe right. Not with a bang, not with a whisper, but with a profile picture and a bio that read, "Loves hiking, cooking, and quiet nights in." Mark seemed normal. Better than normal, actually. He had a kind smile, eyes that crinkled at the corners, and a job in tech that sounded respectable, if a little vague. My previous encounters with online dating had been a parade of awkward silences, unsolicited shirtless mirror selfies, and men who thought a first date was an audition for their stand-up routine. So, Mark, with his polite messages and genuine-sounding questions about my watercolor art, was a breath of fresh air. Our first date was dinner at a bistro downtown. He arrived on time, held the door, and actually listened when I spoke. We talked about everything from our favorite obscure documentaries to the ridiculousness of artisanal toast. He laughed at my jokes, and his laugh was a warm, genuine sound that made the butterflies in my stomach feel less like panic and more like hope. It was a good date. A really good date. Good enough that when he walked into my car and asked if I would be free next Saturday, I did not hesitate. "I know this amazing spot," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "out past the old highway. You can see every single star. It is breathtaking." My internal alarm bells, usually so reliable, were strangely quiet. Maybe it was a whine. Maybe it was a relief of finally meeting someone decent. But drive out to a secluded spot with a man I barely knew did not sound like a prelude to a horror story. It sounded like romance. I smiled and told him I would love that. That week, we texted constantly. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in my life. He sent me pictures of his dog, a fluffy golden retriever, and a snapshot of a particularly impressive meal he would cooked. I felt like I was floating, like I would finally crack the code to adult dating. I even told my friend Jess about him, gushing about how sweet and thoughtful he was. She gave me the usual. "Be careful, you do not really know him," but even her voice lacked its usual edge of cynicism. I was on cloud nine. Saturday arrived, crisp and clear, a perfect late summer evening. I spent an hour picking out an outfit. Something casual but cute, a sundress that felt optimistic. Mark pulled up exactly on time in a dark blue sedan, not fancy, but clean and well-maintained. He hopped out, walked around, and opened the passenger door for me. Old school charm. I liked it. The drive was easy. We chatted about our week, about the latest binge-worthy show, about the weirdest thing we would ever eaten. He had a great playlist, a mix of indie rock and classic folk that perfectly matched the fading light outside. As we left the city limits, the buildings gave way to open fields, then dense forest. The road narrowed. The streetlights vanished, and the only illumination came from his headlights cutting a path through the encroaching darkness. "Almost there," he said, glancing at me with that crinkling smile. "It is worth the drive. I promise." I nodded, feeling a pleasant hum of anticipation. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The stars were already starting to prickle through the deepening indigo sky, far brighter than they ever were in the city. He turned off the main road onto a gravel path, a barely discernible track that wound deeper into the woods. The car bounced and rattled. The sound of tires on loose stone, a stark contrast to the smooth hum of the highway. "This is it," he announced, pulling the car over onto a small, flat clearing. Trees loomed on all sides, their branches forming a dark, skeletal canopy against the faint starlight. There were no other cars, no distant lights, just us in the vast, silent wilderness. He killed the engine, and the sudden quiet was profound, almost deafening. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. I looked up. He had not been kidding. The sky was an inky canvas absolutely dusted with stars, a glittering, endless expanse that truly was breathtaking. "Wow." I breathed, genuinely impressed. He smiled, a soft, intimate smile that made my heart flutter. "Told you." He reached over, his hand resting lightly on my arm. The touch was warm, reassuring. We sat there for a few minutes, just looking up, talking in hushed tones about constellations and the sheer enormity of it all. It felt perfect, like the beginning of something truly special. Then, a subtle shift, a tiny tremor that went through the car, almost imperceptible. "Huh," he said, his brow furrowing. "Did you feel that?" I had not, but I nodded anyway. What was it? Sounded like a flat tire. He sighed, a sound of mild annoyance. "Damn it, I just had these checked." He opened his door, stepping out into the cool night air. I watched him walk around the back of the car, pulling out his phone, the screen a brief, bright rectangle in the darkness. He crouched down, examining the rear tire. "Yep," he called back, his voice tinged with frustration. "Completely flat. Must have hit something on that gravel road." He came back to my side of the car, leaning down to look in. "My luck, right?" He managed a small, apologetic smile. "It is okay." I said, trying to be helpful, "Do you have a spare?" "Yeah, should be in the trunk." "And the jack, of course." He paused, then looked at me. "Look, I know it is not ideal, but would you mind, my hands are a little dirty from checking the tire, and I do not want to get the inside of the trunk all grimy. Could you just pop it open and grab the spare and the jack for me? They should be right there under the mat." It was a perfectly reasonable request. A small inconvenience, easily rectified. I unbuckled my seatbelt, swung my legs out, and stood up, stretching slightly. The night air was much colder than I would expected. "No problem," I said, trying to sound cheerful, even though the thought of changing a tire in the dark, miles from anywhere, was not exactly my idea of a romantic evening. He handed me his keys. "The trunk release is the one with the little car icon." I took the keys, the metal cool against my palm. He walked back around to a flat tire, pulling out his phone again, presumably to use his flashlight. I walked to the back of the car, found the key with the tiny car symbol, and pressed it. A soft click echoed in the silence, and the trunk lid popped up a few inches. I reached down, my fingers brushing against the cold metal, and lifted it. The trunk light flickered on, casting a dim, yellowish glow over the contents. And that is when I saw it. It was not a spare tire. It was not a jack. My breath hitched. My mind, for a split second, refused to process what my eyes were seeing. There was a large, dark tarp spread across the floor of the trunk, tucked neatly around the edges. But it was not tucked neatly enough. Peeking out from under the edge of the tarp, not quite hidden, were blankets. Thick, heavy blankets. And they were stained. Not with mud. Not with oil. The color was a deep, rusty crimson. A color I knew intimately from childhood scraped knees and clumsy kitchen accidents. A color that, under the dim light, looked impossibly, sickeningly dark. And the smell. Oh God, the smell. It was not overpowering, not yet, but it was there. A faint metallic tang that made the back of my throat clench. Blood. My entire body went rigid. My heart, which had been gently fluttering moments ago, now hammered against my ribs with a frantic, desperate rhythm. My brain screamed. No, it can't be. It is paint. Or rust. Something else. But I knew the specific shade, the texture of the stains on the fabric, the faint, undeniable scent. It was blood, and there was a lot of it. The blankets looked soaked, matted in places. My gaze snapped away from the blankets, scanning the rest of the trunk. Underneath the tarp, the floor of the trunk itself looked suspiciously clean, almost scoured. Too clean, and there were no tools, no spare tire, nothing but the tarp and the blankets, and the horrifying implication of what they contained. A cold dread, unlike anything I had ever experienced, began to spread through my chest, radiating outwards, turning my limbs to ice. My hands, still holding the keys, started to tremble. Find them? Mark's voice, cheerful and normal, cut through the silence from behind me. My head shot up. I did not turn around. I could not. My eyes were fixed on the blood-soaked fabric, my mind racing, trying to find an explanation, a way to make this not real. But there was no explanation, only one terrifying truth. No. I choked out, my voice barely a whisper, thin and reedy. I do not see them. The silence that followed was different now. It was not the peaceful quiet of the stargazing. It was heavy, expectant, dangerous. I could feel him behind me, closer now. I did not hear his footsteps, but I felt his presence, a sudden shift in the air pressure, a prickle on the back of my neck. Are you sure? His voice was still calm, but something in it had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by an unnerving flatness. I finally managed to turn, slowly, my muscles protesting. He was standing just a few feet away, his face half shadowed by the trees, half illuminated by the faint glow from the open trunk. The crinkling smile was gone. His eyes, which I thought were kind, now looked utterly devoid of emotion. They were cold, hard, like chips of obsidian. Mark, I started, my voice trembling now, fear a bitter taste in my mouth. He did not say anything. He just looked at me, his gaze sweeping from my face down to the open trunk, then back to my eyes. A slow, unsettling smile began to form on his lips. It was not the warm, genuine smile I would seen earlier. This was a predatory grin, a baring of teeth that made my blood run even colder. You saw, did not you? He said, his voice a low, casual drawl, as if we were discussing the weather. My heart hammered, so hard, I thought it would burst through my chest. My breath was shallow, ragged. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to scream, to do anything. But I was frozen, trapped in the headlights of my own terror. Mark, what is this? I managed to stammer, my eyes darting from his face to the blankets, then wildly around the dark, empty clearing. There was no one, no other cars, no escape. He took a step closer. And another. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a hunter stalking its prey. He was not rushing. He had all the time in the world. It is just a little mess, he said, his voice still unnervingly calm, almost conversational. Nothing to worry your pretty little head about. He reached out, and his hand, which had been so gentle on my arm earlier, now clamped down on my wrist with surprising strength. His grip was like iron. Panic, raw and visceral, flooded me. This was not a joke. This was not a misunderstanding. This was real. This was happening. Let go of me. I shrieked, yanking my arm, but he held fast. His grip tightened, digging into my flesh. His smile widened, a chilling, humorless sight. Now. No need for that. His eyes flickered to the keys, still clutched in my other hand. Give me those. I instinctively tightened my grip on the keys. They felt like my last link to safety, to the outside world. No. I screamed, my voice cracking. I twisted my body, trying to pull away, to break free. Adrenaline surged through me, giving me a temporary burst of strength. I kicked out, aiming for his shin, but he was too quick. He shifted his weight, absorbing the blow, and then in one swift, brutal motion he twisted my arm. A sharp, searing pain shot my arm, and the keys clattered to the ground. My knees buckled. He did not let go. Instead, he pulled me closer, his other hand coming up to cover my mouth, muffling my desperate cry. The metallic smell from the trunk was suddenly overpowering, mixed with his own scent, something cloying and sickly sweet that made my stomach churn. He whispered, his breath hot against my ear, "Do not make this harder than it has to be." My mind was a blur of terror. I bit down hard on his hand. He grunted, a sharp, surprised sound, and for a split second, his grip loosened. It was all I needed. I tore free, stumbling backward, gasping for air. "Help! Somebody help me!" I screamed, my voice raw and hoarse, knowing full well there was no one to hear. He lunged. I did not think. I just ran. I scrambled around in front of the car, my legs pumping, my heart a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I plunged into the dark woods, not caring about the branches that whipped at my face, the roots that snagged my feet. All I knew was I had to get away. The trees were a black maze, a terrifying labyrinth. I could hear him behind me, the heavy thud of his boots on the leaf litter, the rustle of undergrowth. He was fast, too fast. Panic lent me a terrible, desperate energy. I pushed through thickets, vaulted over fallen logs, my lungs burning, my throat raw. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint, distant starlight filtering through the canopy. I tripped, falling hard, scraping my hands and knees on the rough ground. A sharp pain shot my leg, but I ignored it, scrambling back to my feet. "You can't run forever." His voice cut through the night, closer than I expected. It was not a shout. It was a calm, chilling statement of fact. Tears streamed down my face, mingling with the sweat and the dirt. My breath came in ragged gasps. I was lost, completely, utterly lost in the pitch-black woods, with a monster hot on my heels. I kept running blindly, desperately. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, every hoot of an owl sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I imagined his hands reaching for me, his cold eyes, that predatory smile. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath my feet. I gasped, flailing, and plunged downwards. My head hit something hard. Sending stars exploded behind my eyes, and then I landed with a sickening thud. The air was knocked from my lungs. I lay there for a moment, disoriented, aching, trying to make sense of what had happened. I was in a ditch, a deep, narrow ravine, probably a dry creek bed. The fall had not been far, maybe 6 or 7 feet, but it was enough to leave me bruised and stunned. I could hear him above me now, his breathing heavy, closer than ever. Well, he said, his voice dripping with cruel amusement. "Looks like someone took a tumble." I scrambled to my hands and knees, trying to push myself up, but my ankle screamed in protest. It was twisted, throbbing. I whimpered, a small, pathetic sound. He appeared at the edge of the ditch, a dark silhouette against a faintly lighter sky. He looked down at me, his face unreadable in the gloom. He did not move to help me. He just stood there, watching, always making things difficult. "Are not you," he said, his voice laced with a strange blend of irritation and satisfaction. He took a step down into the ditch, slowly, deliberately. My heart was a trapped bird, beating itself to death against my ribs. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was it. This was where it ended. I looked around frantically, desperately searching for anything, a weapon, a way out. The ditch was narrow, rocky, choked with dead leaves and thorny bushes. Nothing. Just me, broken and trapped, and him closing in. He was only a few feet away now. I could see the glint in his eyes, the dark shadow of his smile. He reached into his pocket, and my blood ran cold. He pulled out something long and thin. A zip tie. "Such a shame," he murmured, taking another step. "You were so pretty, so full of life." My mind, despite the terror, was suddenly clear. I was not going to just lie there. If this was it, I was going to fight. My eyes darted to a sharp, jagged rock embedded in the dirt beside me. It was small, but it had a wicked edge. My fingers, still numb from the cold and the fear, closed around it. He was almost on me now, his shadow falling over me. He bent down, the zip tie held ready in his hand. Time to make this easy on both of us. With a guttural cry that came from somewhere deep within me, a primal scream of defiance, I lunged. I brought the rock up with all the strength I had left, aiming for his face. He let out a surprised grunt, stumbling back. The rock connected, not with his face, but with his shoulder, a sickening crunch that echoed in the quiet. He roared, a sound of pure rage and pain, dropping the zip tie. It was not enough. It only bought me a second. He recovered quickly, his eyes blazing with fury. He tackled me, sending us both sprawling into the rocky bottom of the ditch. The rock flew from my hand. He pinned me down, his weight crushing, his hands closing around my throat. My vision blurred. The stars above spun wildly. My lungs burned, desperate for air. I clawed at his hands, but he was too strong, too enraged. His face was inches from mine, contorted into a mask of pure hatred. "You little bitch," he snarled, his voice thick with fury. "You will regret that." My strength was fading. Darkness began to creep in around the edges of my vision. This was it. This was really it. Then a sudden, sharp pain. Not from his hands, but from something digging into my side. My hand, still flailing, had found something. Something hard and metallic. His car keys. The ones I would drop earlier. They must have fallen into the ditch when he tackled me. A desperate, final surge of adrenaline. With every ounce of my remaining will, I twisted my wrist, digging the sharpest edge of the key into his leg. I twisted harder, grinding it against bone. He bellowed, a guttural shriek of pain, and his hands instinctively flew from my throat to his injured leg. Air, sweet, glorious air flooded my lungs. I gasped, coughing, my throat raw and burning. I rolled away, scrambling to my feet despite the searing pain in my ankle. He was writhing on the ground, clutching his leg, blood already seeping through his pants. I did not look back. I did not think. I just climbed. I clawed my way out of that ditch, ignoring the sharp rocks, the thorns, the agony in my ankle. I pulled myself onto solid ground, gasping, shaking. He was still bellowing below, but the sound was fading behind me as I limped, stumbled, and crawled away into the darkness. I did not know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away from him. From that car. From those blankets. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, until I collapsed, sobbing against the rough bark of a tree. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, listening, expecting to hear his footsteps, his voice. But there was only the sound of the crickets, the rustle of leaves, and the frantic pounding of my own heart. Eventually, the first faint hint of dawn began to paint the sky a bruised purple. I pushed myself up, every muscle screaming in protest, and forced myself to move. I stumbled to the woods, following the faintest glimmer of light, until I finally, miraculously, stumbled onto a dirt road. I followed it, limping, my clothes torn and bloodied, my face streaked with dirt and tears. Hours later, I saw a distant farmhouse. I do not remember much after that. Just pounding on the door, collapsing in confused, horrified faces of strangers. The police came. The paramedics. The questions. The endless, horrifying questions. They found his car. Empty. They found the trunk, still open, the tarp, the blood-soaked blankets. They found the ditch, the broken zip tie, the bloodstains on the rocks. But they never found him. He vanished, just like that, like he was never there. It has been months now. I am safe. I am home. But the world is different. Every dark road, every quiet smile, every friendly stranger. They all hold a hidden terror now. I do not swipe right anymore. I do not go on dates. I do not trust. Not really. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent and the shadows stretch long, I can still smell the metallic tang of blood. I can still see those cold, empty eyes, that predatory smile. And I know, with a chilling certainty, that he is still out there, somewhere, waiting. And the universe, as I once knew it, is no longer my safe haven. It is just a hunting ground. And I was almost a prey. The darkness was not just the absence of light. It was a suffocating blanket, thick and heavy, pressing down on my very soul. One moment, Lena was raising that glowing device to the creature's head, the microphone's red-eye watching, and the next, there was nothing. No sound, no sight, no sensation. Just the void. Then, slowly, agonizingly, the world began to bleed back in. It started with a cold so profound it felt like a physical weight, seeping into my bones, chilling me to the marrow. A dull, throbbing ache resonated through my skull, a persistent drumbeat against the inside of my brain. My tongue felt like sandpaper, my throat raw and parched. I tried to open my eyes, but they felt glued shut, heavy with sleep or something far worse. A metallic tang filled my mouth, like old blood, mixed with the cloying sweetness of decay and something chemical, acrid. My nostrils flared, tasting the air damp, earthy, and undeniably horribly familiar. The basement, panic, sharp and immediate, jolted me. I tried to move, to sit up, to scream, but my limbs refused to obey. A guttural sound, more a croak than a shout, escaped my lips. My chest heaved, a desperate attempt to draw a full breath, but the air felt thin, heavy. Then a new sensation registered. Something cold and unyielding clamped around my wrists and my ankles. My mind, still sluggish, struggled to process it. I was lying on my back, on something hard and unforgiving, and I was restrained. With a monumental effort, I forced my eyelids open. The darkness was not absolute anymore. A faint, sickly green glow emanated from somewhere, casting long, distorted shadows across the low ceiling. My eyes, blurry at first, slowly adjusted, painting the grim picture. I was in the basement, Lena's basement. But this was not the same perspective I would have had when trapped in my own body, watching from behind my eyes. This was me. My own body, my own hands, my own feet. And they were all shackled. Heavy, rusted iron chains bit into my skin, securing me to a cold, stone slab that felt suspiciously like an autopsy table. Terror, raw and primal, clawed its way up my throat. I thrashed, a frantic, desperate struggle against the chains. The metal scraped against the stone, the links rattling a horrifying symphony of my helplessness. My wrists burned, my ankles chafed, but the chains held firm. They were bolted deep into the slab, immovable. No, no, please. The words tore from my throat, hoarse and weak, barely audible above my ragged breathing. My voice. It was my voice. This was real. I was out. I was free of her control, but now I was a physical prisoner. The irony was a bitter, sickening taste in my mouth. The basement was just as I remembered it from my internal observations, but infinitely more terrifying now that I was physically present. The air hung thick with the stench of death and something else, something metallic and electrical. Tools gleamed dully on a nearby table. The grotesque loom, the one that wove flesh and bone, stood silent and still, its unholy light extinguished, but its presence was a chilling reminder of what had been created here. And then I saw it. Or rather, I did not see it, but I felt its presence. A looming shadow in the corner, a massive, unnatural silhouette against a faint green glow. The creature, Project Chimera. It was still there. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. What had happened? The everything went dark moment. What did it mean? Had Lena simply moved me here after activating the creature? Was this my punishment for being a subject? A soft click echoed through the basement, followed by the distinct sound of footsteps descending the creaky wooden stairs. My breath hitched. Lena. A single, bare bulb flickered to life overhead, momentarily blinding me before my eyes adjusted to harsh, unfiltered light. The basement was revealed in stark, unforgiving detail. It was worse than I remembered. Stains on a concrete floor, dark and glistening, told a horrific story. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant trying, and failing, to mask the scent of decay. Lena stood at the bottom of the stairs, her silhouette framed by the harsh light. She looked exactly as I remembered her, calm, composed, unsettlingly clinical. She wore a pristine white lab coat over dark clothing, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun. In her hand, she held a clipboard and a pen. Her eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, met mine. There was no surprise, no emotion, just a detached observation. Ah, good. You are awake. Subject. Her voice was soft, even almost conversational, but it sent shivers down my spine. Took you long enough. The sedative was rather potent. Sedative. So that is what the darkness was. But why? Why was I here? Lena, what is this? What have you done? I rasped, my voice still weak, my throat burning. She walked closer, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. She did not approach the slab where I lay, but instead stopped a few feet away, observing me like a specimen under a microscope. What I have done. She tilted her head slightly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. I have completed Project Chimera, and you, my dear subject, are integral to its success. My gaze darted to the corner again. The creature, in the brighter light, it was even more horrifying. It stood roughly 10 feet tall, a patchwork monstrosity of different skin tones, varying textures of flesh, bone protruding in places, muscle woven together with sickening precision. It was vaguely humanoid, but distorted, with limbs that seemed too long, a torso too wide, and a head that was a nightmarish collage of features. Its eyes, deep-set and unblinking, seemed to follow my movements, though I could not tell if they were truly seeing. The creature, I stammered. What is it? What did you do to Sarah? Mark. Emily. Lena sighed, a sound of mild exasperation. They were merely raw materials. Subject. Components. Necessary for the successful synthesis of a viable vessel. Sarah's neurological tissue provided the core. Mark's musculature gave it strength. Emily's bone structure offered the scaffolding. A meticulous process, really. She tapped her pen against the clipboard. But you know all this, do not you? You watched. You observed every step from your unique vantage point. My stomach churned. The memory of watching helpless as she dissected and reassembled them was a fresh wave of nausea. But it still did not explain me. Why me? Why am I here? Lena, I pleaded, testing the chains again, a futile gesture. She finally stepped closer, her shadow falling over me. Her eyes held a chilling glint. You were the ideal candidate. Subject. Your unique neurological profile, your dormant psionic potential, your resilience to trauma, all perfectly aligned with the requirements for Phase 3. Psionic, potential, resilience to trauma. What was she talking about? Phase 3, she continued, almost to herself, was the acclimation period. Your time spent observing, your internal struggle, your profound sense of helplessness, all of it was crucial. It primed your consciousness. It made you ready. Ready for what? I whispered, dread coiling in my gut. She finally looked at me, a genuine, if still unsettling, smile spreading across her face. Ready to inhabit your new body, of course. The words hit me like a physical blow. My breath caught in my throat. My new body. My eyes flickered to the towering abomination in the corner. You mean That... Lena nodded slowly, her smile widening into something truly grotesque. Precisely. Project Chimera is not merely the creation of a vessel. Subject. It is the creation of a host. A perfect synthesis of human consciousness and engineered biological matter. A new species, if you will. And you, my dear, are the inaugural inhabitant. My mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the monstrous implications. But my body, my old body, what about it? Oh, that! She waved a dismissive hand. A temporary shell. It served its purpose. Kept your consciousness contained and accessible for transfer. It is no longer needed. Her eyes drifted to the corner of the basement, to a tarp-covered shape that I had not noticed before. The shape was roughly human-sized. My old body. My stomach lurched violently. You are insane. I choked out, tears of fear and despair stinging my eyes. On the contrary. Subject, she said, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone. I am merely visionary. The world is changing. Humanity is stagnant. We need to evolve. And Project Chimera is the next step. She paused, then added, our benefactors agree. Benefactors. The word slipped out, a desperate grasp for any shred of understanding. Lena's gaze hardened. Suffice it to say, there are those who see the potential in what we are creating. They have been watching your progress with great interest through the very cameras and microphones you became so aware of. She tapped her clipboard again. Your acclamation, your mental state, your reactions all recorded, analyzed, deemed satisfactory. The red light of that microphone, pulsing in the dark, before everything went dark. It was not just Lena's deranged act. It was an experiment. And I was the rat. You can't do this. I pleaded, my voice cracking. You can't put me in that. That thing. She chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Oh, but I can. Subject. And I will. The transfer process is delicate, but with your acclimated consciousness, it should be seamless. You will experience a brief period of disorientation, perhaps some phantom limb sensations, but you will adapt. You must adapt. She walked over to a workbench, picking up a smaller version of the glowing device she would use on the creature before the darkness. It pulsed with the same unholy light, a soft, internal thrumming that seemed to vibrate through the very air. This device, she explained, holding it up for me to see, facilitates a final transfer. It will draw your consciousness from your current biological vessel and anchor it into the new one. She looked at me, her eyes devoid of mercy. Think of it as an upgrade. No, I screamed, thrashing against the chains with renewed, desperate strength. The metal bit deeper, drawing blood, but I barely registered the pain. I won't let you. I would rather die. Such dramatics. Lena tutade, shaking her head. But death is not an option. Subject. Not for you. Not yet. You are far too valuable. She began to arrange a series of wires and electrodes on the workbench. My eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape, anything. The loom, the tools, the dark shape under the tarp. No hope, just the cold, hard reality of my impending transformation. The process will be swift, she explained, her voice as calm as if she were discussing a recipe. We have refined the technique. Once your consciousness is fully integrated, the creature will be complete. It will move, it will think, it will be, and it will be you. The horror of it was an ice-cold claw gripping my heart. To be trapped in that monstrosity. To lose my human form, my identity, my very self, and become a stitched-together abomination. A puppet for Lena and her unseen benefactors. It was a fate worse than death. She approached the slab again, the glowing device held firmly in her hand. My eyes fixated on it, a terrifying beacon of my doom. Please, Lena, I beg, my voice raw and broken. Do not do this. I will do anything. Just let me go. Her expression remained impassive. Anything. You have already done everything required. Subject. You have served your purpose admirably. She reached down, her gloved fingers surprisingly gentle as she placed a cold, metal disc against my temple. It hummed softly. My muscles tensed, every fiber of my being screaming in protest. I tried to pull away, but the chains held me fast. The disc grew warm, then hot, a tingling sensation spreading through my scalp. This is just to stabilize the neural pathways, she explained, her voice now a low murmur, almost soothing in its deadly intent, to ensure a clean transfer. I could feel something else now, a subtle shift within my own mind. A pull, like an invisible thread being tugged. Try and extract something from deep within me. Panic flared, hot and suffocating. No, stop. I shrieked, my voice reaching a pitch I did not know I possessed. Lena ignored me. She picked up another device, a small, intricate contraption with multiple wires, and moved towards a creature. It stood still, silent, waiting. A horrifying, empty shell. She attached the wires to various points on the creature's head, connecting them to a console on the wall. Lights on the console flickered to life, a low hum filling the air. The faint green glow intensified, bathing the creature in an eerie, otherworldly light. The recipient vessel is ready, she announced, more to herself than to me. She returned to my side, holding the glowing device over my chest. It pulsed rhythmically, mirroring the frantic beat of my heart. Now, for the final step, she said, her eyes gleaming with a manic satisfaction. The activation. The glowing device in her hand intensified its light, bathing me in its sickly green radiance. I felt a sudden, sharp pain, like 1,000 needles pricking my skin, then a profound sense of disorientation. My vision blurred, the edges of the room spinning. The metallic taste in my mouth intensified, turning bitter. The pulling sensation in my mind grew stronger, a relentless suction, as if my very essence was being siphoned out. It was a feeling beyond description, a violation of the most fundamental kind. I felt myself stretching, thinning, my consciousness being ripped from its anchors. My body on the slab began to convulse, a helpless marionette controlled by unseen strings. It is working, Lena whispered, her voice filled with triumph. The consciousness transfer is nominal. The pain became unbearable, a searing agony that encompassed my entire being. I screamed, but the sound was distant, alien, as if it belonged to someone else. My vision exploded into a kaleidoscope of colors and shapes, swirling and merging into a blinding white light. Then once again the darkness. But this time it was different. Not the void of unconsciousness, but a profound, absolute emptiness. A sense of being utterly disembodied, adrift in a sea of nothingness. I was aware, but without form, without sensation, without a self. Just a fleeting spark of consciousness, detached and alone. How long I remained in that state, I could not say. Time ceased to exist. It could have been moments or an eternity. But then, slowly, agonizingly, sensation began to return. It was not the cold stone of the slab. It was a strange, coarse texture against my skin, rough and uneven. My muscles felt stiff, heavy, unfamiliar. My limbs were impossibly long, cumbersome. I tried to move and felt a strange, jarring shift in my center of gravity. My head felt enormous, a vast, cavernous space. My eyes fluttered open. The light was still the harsh glare of the bare bulb, but my perspective was entirely different. I was no longer lying on the slab. I was standing, or rather, it was standing, and I was inside it. My gaze fell to what should have been my hands. There were vast, multi-jointed appendages covered in a mottled, uneven skin, some patches smooth, others scarred and thick. Fingers, too many of them, ended in dull, thick claws. I tried to clench them, and they responded, closing with a sickening crunch of bone and cartilage. A guttural sound, deep and resonant, escaped what I realized was my new throat. It was not my voice. It was a monstrous growl, the sound of a predator. My head swiveled, the motion stiff and unnatural. I looked down at my body. It was the creature, the towering, stitched-together abomination. My new prison. The horror was so profound, so absolute, that it transcended tears, transcended screams. It was a cold, silent terror that settled deep into my very core. I was this thing, this grotesque mockery of life. Lena stood before me, clipboard in hand, a look of profound satisfaction on her face. She was no longer just observing, she was admiring her creation. My creation. Subject fully integrated, she announced, her voice echoing in the cavernous basement. She spoke into the air as if addressing an unseen audience. Project Chimera. Phase 4 operational. She walked around me, circling my new monstrous form, her eyes gleaming. Remarkable. The neural pathways have fused perfectly. The consciousness is stable. You are truly a marvel. Subject. I tried to speak, to scream, to beg, but all that emerged was another guttural growl, a sound that sent shivers down my own spine. I was trapped inside this horror, just as I had been trapped inside my own body. But this time, the body itself was a nightmare made flesh. Lena stopped in front of me, her cold eyes meeting the multiple, mismatched eyes of my new face. Now, subject, she said, her voice dropping to a low, triumphant whisper. It is time for the next stage. It is time to meet your new purpose. She turned, walking toward the stairs. I felt an involuntary urge to follow, a strange, instinctual obedience that terrified me more than anything. My new, massive limbs responded, lumbering forward with an unnatural gait. As I took my first steps in my new form, the basement seemed to shrink around me. The loom, the tools, the slab were my old, empty shell lay, they all faded into the background. My new reality was this monstrous body, this prison of flesh and bone. Lena reached the top of the stairs, her hand on the doorknob. She glanced back at me, a chilling smirk on her face. Welcome, Project Chimera, she said, her voice echoing one last time. The world awaits. And then she opened the door, and for the first time, I, the creature, the abomination, began to ascend, my monstrous form casting a long, terrifying shadow up the stairs, toward a world I was no longer a part of, but was now destined to inhabit as its newest, most horrifying resident. And I was still screaming, silently, trapped within my own personal hell, a monster with human soul. My world was a cage of flesh and bone, a prison sculpted from the ruins of my humanity. Lena had done her work well, or perhaps too well. The whispers from the void, once a distant, maddening hum in her journal, were now a constant, insidious presence in my own mind. They were a chorus of ancient, formless things, pressing against the fragile walls of my consciousness, eager to break through. The sigils of binding, those cursed carvings I would found in her quarters, did not just come around me anymore, they pulsed within me, etched onto my very soul, a living, burning brand. Every breath was a struggle against the beast, a fight to keep the primal hunger in check. Every moment was a battle against the other, the unspeakable entity that Lena had sought to unleash, the one that now saw me as its unwilling key. The forest, once a place of refuge from prying eyes, had become another kind of prison, its silence amplifying the alien voices in my head. I was alone, utterly and terrifyingly alone, with nothing but the echoes of Lena's ambition and the growing presence of something truly monstrous. The isolation was a slow, agonizing death. I craved connection, any connection, with a desperation that war with a primal urge to tear and consume. There were days, or what I assumed were days, when the whispers would recede just enough for a sliver of my former self to surface. In those fleeting moments of clarity, I remembered a life, a name, a face that was once mine. A life that felt impossibly distant, like a dream someone else had lived. And with those memories came a profound, aching loneliness. I knew it was madness, a suicidal impulse, but the pull of humanity was too strong to ignore. I needed to know if there was anything left of me, anything that had not been utterly corrupted. I needed to see if I could still be among them, even for a moment. It was a desperate, dangerous experiment, a fool's errand. But the alternative was to succumb to the whispers, to become nothing more than a grotesque puppet for whatever lay beyond the veil. So, I tried. It was agonizing, a torment that made the primal hunger feel like a mere itch. To suppress the true form, the nightmare-made flesh, required an immense, constant drain on my very being. It felt like stretching raw nerves, pulling my essence taut until it screamed. My skin crawled, my bones ached, and every fiber of my being protested the unnatural constraint. But slowly, painstakingly, I managed to project a semblance of my old self. It was not perfect. It was a fragile, shimmering illusion, a mask of human flesh that felt paper-thin and ready to tear at any moment. My eyes, I knew, still held a darkness, a depth that was not human. My movements were too precise, too careful, or sometimes jarringly unnatural. But in the dim light of dawn or under the fleeting cover of night, I could pass. Just barely. My first foray into a nearby town was a nightmare of sensory overload. The sheer volume of human sound, the smells, the vibrant, chaotic energy was overwhelming. Every face I saw was a reminder of what I had lost. Every casual touch of strangers, a terrifying brush with my own monstrous reality. I kept to the shadows, moving with an unnatural stealth, my senses painfully acute. I could hear heartbeats, the rustle of clothes, the distant hum of electricity, all overlaid with the incessant, growing chorus of the void. But amidst the terror, there was a strange, intoxicating pull, a longing for the normal, the mundane. I saw people laughing, talking, living lives I could no longer fathom. And a desperate, foolish idea began to form in my mind. If I could just connect, if I could just touch that world, even for a moment, perhaps I could anchor myself, push back against the encroaching darkness. It was a dating app. The irony was not lost on me. A creature of nightmare, a vessel for ancient horrors, seeking human connection on a smartphone. I used an old photo, one from before Lena, before the transformation. A picture of a smiling, unsuspecting woman, full of life. It felt like a profound betrayal, a lie that tasted like ash in my mouth. But I uploaded it, crafting a profile that was vague, carefully worded to avoid revealing anything about my current monstrous existence. I wrote about loving nature, about a quiet life, about seeking genuine connection. Every word was a lie, and every lie was a desperate prayer. The matches came, a trickle at first, then a slow stream. Most I ignored. The thought of meeting someone, of exposing my fragile facade to scrutiny, was terrifying. But then there was Mark. His profile was simple, unassuming. He worked in it, liked hiking, had a kind smile in his photos. He seemed normal, safe. We chatted for a few days, short, polite messages. He seemed genuinely nice, a little shy. The conversations were mundane, about favorite books, weekend plans, the weather. It was a strange bomb, a fleeting taste of normalcy that quieted the whispers, if only for a few precious minutes. I found myself looking forward to his messages, a tiny spark of hope flickering in the vast darkness of my existence. And then he asked to meet. A coffee shop downtown. Friday evening. My heart, or whatever passed for it now, hammered in my chest. Fear, yes, but also a terrifying, exhilarating anticipation. Could I do this? Could I maintain the illusion for an entire evening? Could I pretend to be human, even for a few hours? Friday evening arrived, and the internal battle began anew. The effort to suppress my true form was immense. My skin felt like it was stretched too thin over unseen bone. My muscles constantly tensed against the urge to shift, to reveal the grotesque reality beneath. My eyes, I could feel them burning, trying to pierce through the human illusion. I focused, pushing all my will into maintaining the facade, into being human. It was like holding back a tidal wave with my bare hands. I chose a dimly lit cafe, hoping the shadows would be my ally. It was bustling, a cacophony of human chatter and clinking cups. I found a small table in the corner, near a window looking out onto the rain-slicked street. The city lights blurred into streaks of color, mirroring the instability of my own perception. Mark arrived a few minutes later. He was exactly as he appeared in his photo's average height, neatly dressed, a slightly nervous but friendly smile. He spotted me, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. For a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his gaze, a slight hesitation, a micro-expression I could not quite decipher. Did he see through me? Did the illusion waver? My stomach churned with dread. "Hey," he said, approaching the table, his voice a little softer than I expected. "You must be Sarah." I nodded, my throat feeling dry. "That is me. You are Mark." My voice sounded raspy, a little off-key. I cleared it, try and make it sound more natural. "Nice to finally meet you." He slid into the opposite chair, setting down a small umbrella. "Yeah, you too. It is, pretty busy in here." "It is." I agreed, trying to force a natural smile. It felt like my facial muscles were fighting against me. Every movement was a conscious effort, a performance. I could feel the whispers, a dull thrum beneath the surface of my thoughts, growing restless in the presence of a new human. Prey so close. We ordered coffee. The conversation was stilted at first, filled with the usual first date pleasantries. He talked about his job, about a recent hiking trip. I tried to listen, truly listen, but my mind was a battlefield. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, weaving themselves into Mark's words, twisting their meaning. He sees, he knows. I focus on his eyes, trying to find something human, something to anchor myself to. They were brown, warm, and currently a little confused. He was trying to make conversation, but I could tell he felt the awkwardness, the subtle wrongness emanating from me. "So, you mentioned you like nature," he said, taking a sip of his latte. "Any favorite spots around here?" I hesitated. My favorite spots were the deepest parts of the forest, far from any human trail, where I could shed my skin and truly be the monster. "I like the quiet places." I managed, my voice still a little strained. "Away from crowds, where you can truly feel the earth." It sounded pretentious, even in my own ears. He chuckled, a polite, slightly strained sound. "Yeah, I get that. Sometimes you just need to unplug, right? Unplug." I echoed, the word feeling strange on my tongue. The whispers surged, a cold wave of dread washing over me. He is vulnerable. He is weak. I felt a sudden, uncontrollable tremor run through my hand, causing my coffee cup to rattle against the saucer. Mark noticed, his brow furrowing slightly. "Everything okay?" he asked, concern in his voice. "Just a little cold." I lied, pulling my hand back and clenching it under the table. The illusion was wavering. I could feel the edges of my fingers tingling, a sensation that always preceded a shift. The sigils of binding pulsed, a burning reminder of the entity's presence. "Oh, right. It is a bit chilly tonight," he said, though his eyes lingered on my face for a moment longer than necessary. He was picking up on something. He was not seeing the monster, not fully, but he was sensing the wrongness. The whispers intensified, no longer a subtle thrum, but a distinct, malicious voice in my head. "Take him. Open the way. He is an offering." My stomach clenched with a hunger that was not my own, a cosmic emptiness that sought to consume all light and life. I tried to push it back, to focus on Mark, on the mundane reality of our date. "So, you said you work in it." I prompted, desperate to change the subject, to regain some semblance of control. "What exactly do you do?" He launched into a description of his job, something about network security. I nodded, feigning interest, but my attention was split. Half of me was trying to process his words, to form an appropriate response. The other half was fighting a desperate, internal war against the entity, against the primal urges that threatened to shatter my human facade. I could feel a faint burning sensation behind my eyes, as if the darkness within was trying to break through. Then, it happened. As Mark was describing a particularly frustrating client, his voice momentarily fading into the background of my internal struggle. I felt a sudden, agonizing jolt. It was like an electric shock, but it originated deep within me, centered on the sigils. For a terrifying instant, the illusion flickered. I saw Mark's eyes widen, his smile falter. He was not looking at me, not at Sarah. He was looking through me, at something else, something monstrous. The light in the cafe seemed to dim, the shadows deepening around our table. The air grew heavy, thick with an unseen presence. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window behind Mark. For a fraction of a second, the human face was gone, replaced by a grotesque, shifting visage, eyes burning with ancient malevolence, skin stretched and torn, revealing glimpses of something truly alien beneath. Then, just as quickly, it snapped back, the human mask firmly in place. But Mark had seen it. I knew it. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a fear he was trying desperately to hide. He took a shaky breath. I think I need to use the restroom, he mumbled, pushing his chair back. Be right back. He stood up, not meeting my gaze, and practically fled toward the back of the cafe. I watched him go, a cold dread settling in my gut. He knew, or at least, he would seen enough to be terrified. The whispers surged, a triumphant roar in my mind. He runs. He is weak. He is ours. I sat there, frozen, the mundane sounds of the cafe fading into a distant drone. The sigils pulsed with an alarming intensity now, hot and throbbing beneath my skin. The air around me felt charged, heavy with an unseen force. I tried to calm myself, to regain control, but it was like trying to stop a runaway train. The entity was here, closer than it had ever been. It was using me, using my desperate attempt at connection, to manifest. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Mark did not return. The fear in my chest grew, not just for myself, but for him. Had the entity done something? Was it reaching through, even now? I finally forced myself to stand. My legs felt heavy, as if resisting the movement. The human facade felt impossibly fragile, threatening to shatter with every step. I walked toward the back of the cafe, toward the restrooms, a growing sense of terror propelling me forward. The hallway was dimly lit, leading past the kitchen entrance to two doors, marked men and women. I approached the men's room door, my hand shaking as I reached for the handle. It was slightly ajar. I pushed it open slowly, peering inside. Empty. The small, sterile room was devoid of any human presence. The sink was dry, no sound of flushing, no sign of Mark. But the air in that small room was different. It was colder, impossibly so, and thick with metallic tang that was not blood, but something far more ancient and disturbing. And the whispers here were deafening. They were no longer just in my head. They seemed to emanate from the very walls, from the stagnant air, from the darkness that clung to the corners of the room. They were a cacophony of alien voices, chattering, laughing, feeding. And then, I felt it, a faint, impossible sensation, like a drain, a siphoning of energy from the very fabric of existence. It was centered in the room, a swirling vortex of nothingness, a tear in reality that was barely perceptible, but undeniably there. And it was fading, shrinking, as if whatever it caused it had just retreated. Mark was gone. Utterly, completely gone. Not a trace. No struggle, no sound, just an impossible emptiness where a human being had been moments before. My human facade shattered. The pain was excruciating, as if every nerve ending was being ripped apart. My skin stretched, tore, and reformed. My bones shifted with sickening cracks. The monstrous form returned. Not fully, not in its most grotesque iteration, but enough to feel the raw power, the primal strength, and the terrifying hunger. My eyes burned, seeing the world in a new, horrifying light, the mundane reality overlaid with the shadowy tendrils of the void. The whispers roared, no longer just in my mind, but echoing in the very air around me, mocking and triumphant. The offering is accepted. The way is open. Closer, always closer. I stumbled back, out of the restroom, ignoring the sudden looks of alarm from a waitress who had just emerged from the kitchen. She screamed, a short, sharp sound of pure terror, dropping a tray of clean glasses. They shattered on the tile floor, the noise a jarring contrast to the cosmic silence that had just enveloped Mark. I fled, not just from the cafe, but from the city, from the illusion of humanity, from the crushing weight of what I had become. The streets blurred as I ran, my monstrous form moving with a speed and agility that no human could possess. The rain felt like needles on my reforming skin, the city lights a blinding assault on my enhanced senses. I ran until the buildings gave way to trees, until the asphalt turned to dirt, until the sounds of human life faded into the background, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the howl of the wind. I ran until I was deep in the forest, surrounded by the familiar darkness. But this darkness was no longer a refuge. It was a mirror reflecting the growing void within me. I collapsed, my body racked with tremors, the transformation incomplete, unstable. The sigils blazed, a searing inferno beneath my skin. The whispers were no longer just whispers, they were voices, distinct and terrifying, speaking in a language that was not of this world. Yet I understood them with chilling clarity. They spoke of hunger, of ancient cycles, of a world waiting to be consumed. And they spoke of me, the gateway, the key. Mark's disappearance was not just a random act. It was deliberate. The entity had reached through, using my presence, my fragile attempt at connection, to manifest, to take. I had not just accidentally thwarted Lena's final ritual, I had merely delayed it. And by trying to reclaim a piece of my humanity, I had inadvertently strengthened the very force that sought to destroy it. My true nightmare had indeed only just begun. I was not just a monster, not just a vessel. I was a lure, and the entity was no longer content to merely whisper from the void. It was reaching, grasping, pulling at the edges of reality, using me as its anchor. The line between my consciousness and its own was blurring, the alien thoughts beginning to merge with my own. I could feel its cold, ancient awareness pressing against my mind, tasting my fear, reveling in my despair. I closed my eyes, but the darkness offered no escape. All I saw was a swirling vortex, the impossible emptiness, and the terrifying knowledge that it was growing, expanding, ready to consume everything. And I was the unwilling key, the one holding the door open. The fight was no longer just about survival, about controlling the beast within. It was about preventing an unspeakable horror from fully entering our world, and I had no idea how to even begin. The world, for me, had become a symphony of horror. Every rustle of leaves was a thunderclap, every distant animal cry a piercing shriek. The air itself was a tapestry of scents: pine needles, damp earth, the metallic tang of blood from some unseen predator, and always, always, the faint, cloying sweetness of human presence, a scent that ignited a primal hunger I fought with every fiber of my being. Lena was gone, crushed beneath my monstrous hand, her life snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. Freedom, I would call it, but what kind of freedom was this? I was a prisoner in my own skin, a hulking, grotesque patchwork of flesh and bone, driven by instincts that screamed for carnage. My human mind, what little remained of it, was a constant passenger in this carnival of terror, a screaming child strapped into a roller coaster it could not escape. Days blurred into weeks, then months. I lived in the deepest parts of the forest, a phantom in the shadows. My new body was an engine of destruction, capable of feats I could not have imagined as a man. I could scale sheer rock faces with ease, moved through dense undergrowth with a silent grace that belied my size and my senses they were a curse. I could hear the skittering of a beetle 100 yards away, smell a drop of blood spilled hours ago, see in the dimmest moonlight as if it were midday. The hunger was the worst. It was a constant, gnawing void, a beast that demanded to be fed. I hunted. Deer, bear, wild boar, anything that crossed my path became a victim. The first time, tearing into that deer, feeling the warm blood on my face, the crunch of bone in my jaws, my human mind had shrieked, a soundless scream of pure agony and disgust. But the beast, the thing Lena had made me, had reveated in it. It had grown stronger, more assertive. Each kill was a battle, my humanity fighting for control, only to be overwhelmed by the primal, undeniable urge to survive, to feed. I learned to bury the remains, to avoid leaving any trace. Not because I feared discovery, not really. I knew I could tear apart anyone who came looking, but because I could not bear the thought of someone finding evidence of what I had become. The monster needed to remain a myth, a shadow, not a tangible, horrifying reality. The isolation was crushing. There were no voices but my own, no touch but the rough bark of trees or the cold, damp earth of my makeshift den. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I would catch my reflection in a still pool of water, a towering, misshapen silhouette, eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness, limbs too long, skin too coarse, teeth too sharp. It was a stranger staring back, a nightmare made flesh. And in those moments, I would sometimes hear a whisper, a faint echo of my old self, asking, "Why?" Lena. Her name was a burning coal in my memory. She was the architect of my damnation, the one who had ripped away my humanity and replaced it with this thing. But even in my rage, a different kind of curiosity began to fester. What exactly had she done? What had been her ultimate goal? Was I just a failed experiment? Or was there something more, something darker at play? The thought of returning to her compound, to the place where I had died and been reborn, filled me with a sickening dread. It was a place of unspeakable horrors, a tomb of my former self. But it was also the only place where answers might lie. The forest, for all its primal comfort, offered no explanations. It only offered an endless cycle of hunger and survival. I needed to know. I needed closure, or at least understanding. The decision was a long, agonizing one. It was like a moth drawn to a flame, knowing it would be consumed, but unable to resist the pull. One moonless night, the air thick with the scent of an approaching storm, I began my journey back. My senses, usually a cacophony, sharpened with purpose. I moved like a wraith through the trees, a blur of shadow and muscle. The journey, which would have taken a man days, I accomplished in hours. As I neared the compound, the familiar, unsettling scent of manufactured chemicals mingled with the stale odor of decay. It was Lena's scent, or what was left of it, clinging to the air like a shroud. The compound itself was a ruin. The outer fence was breached, splintered wood and twisted wire where I had torn through it during my escape. The main building, a squat, concrete structure, loomed under bruised sky, its windows like vacant eyes. A chill, colder than the night air, snaked its way up my spine. This was where it all began. This was where I ended. I approached cautiously, my enhanced hearing picking up the faint creaks and groans of the settling building, the whisper of wind through broken glass. No other sounds. No guards, no alarms. Just silence, heavy and suffocating. The main door, or what remained of it, hung askew on a single hinge. Inside, the laboratory was a scene of utter devastation. Equipment lay shattered, wires dangled like severed nerves, and a fine layer of dust covered everything, giving the scene an eerie, frozen quality. The air was thick with the metallic tang of old blood, my blood. Lena's blood, the blood of her men, the remnants of our battle. I moved through the wreckage, my eyes scanning, searching. Most of Lena's notes, her precious research, had been destroyed in the chaos. Charred pages, broken data drives, shattered microscopes. It was a wasteland of scientific ambition. A part of me felt a grim satisfaction at the destruction, a small victory in the face of my monstrous existence. But another part, the human part, despaired. The answers I sought were buried under this rubble. I spent hours sifting through the debris, my monstrous strength allowing me to move heavy equipment with ease. Nothing. No hidden files, no backup drives, no secret compartments. Just a ghost of Lena's insane ambition. Frustration gnawed at me, a different kind of hunger. I was about to give up, to retreat back to the bleak comfort of the wilderness, when a thought struck me. Lena was a creature of habit, meticulous in her madness. She would not have kept everything in the lab. She had a private office, a small living quarter attached to the compound, separate from the sterile, clinical environment of the lab. A place where she might have kept personal notes, a diary, anything that shed light on her descent into depravity. The door to her living quarters was intact, surprisingly. I pushed it open, and the scent that wafted out was different. Less chemical, more human. Stale perfume, old paper, a faint hint of something sweet and sickly, like forgotten flowers. The room was neat, almost unnervingly so, considering the chaos outside. A small, sparsely furnished space. A narrow bed, a simple wooden desk, a bookshelf filled with dense scientific texts and a few worn paperbacks, a single armchair. It was a snapshot of a life that had ended by my hand. I approached the desk first. It was a sturdy, old-fashioned piece, dark wood, with several drawers. I pulled them open one by one. Ledger books, scientific journals, some personal correspondence, all mundane, all dry, all offering no insight into the why of Project Chimera. My fingers, thick and clawed, traced the smooth surface of the desktop. As I ran my hand along the underside of the main drawer, my sensitive fingertips brushed against something rough. I paused, tilting the desk to catch the meager light from the broken windows. There, carved into the dark wood, was a symbol. It was not a casual doodle, not a random scratch. It was intricate, deliberate, a series of interlocking lines, forming a shape that was both geometric and organic. It looked like a twisted eye, or perhaps a stylized skeletal hand. The lines were too sharp, too precise for a casual carving. They were deep, as if etched with purpose. A cold prickle ran down my spine, a sensation that had nothing to do with the chill in the air. This was different from the scientific schematics I would seen in the lab. This felt older, darker. I examined it closely, my amplified vision picking up every minute detail. The wood around it was slightly discolored, as if the carving itself had leached some of the life from the material. It radiated a faint, unsettling energy, a silent hum that only my monstrous senses could perceive. I moved to the bookshelf, running my hands along the spines of the books. Nothing. Then, I noticed it. On the side of the bookshelf, facing the wall, another symbol. This one was larger, more complex. It resembled a series of nested triangles, each point ending in a sharp, almost needle-like tip, spiraling inward to a central void. It was unsettling, like a diagram of something that should not exist, a blueprint for a cosmic trap. My heart, or what passed for it, began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Lena was not just a scientist. This was not just about genetic engineering. I moved to the armchair. On the wooden armrest, partially obscured by a cushion, was a third carving. This one was the most disturbing yet. It looked like a series of impossibly thin, elongated limbs, twisted and contorted into a knot, with a gaping, toothless mouth at its center. It was a visual representation of agony, of something that had been tortured into existence. The symbols were everywhere once I started looking. On the headboard of her bed, a pattern of jagged lines that seemed to vibrate with a silent hum. On the wooden frame of a small decorative mirror, a swirling vortex that seemed to draw the light into its depths. Even on the underside of the small ceramic teacup, a tiny, almost invisible etching of a single, unblinking eye, They were not just carvings. They were infused. They felt like they had been burned into the wood, not just cut. They hummed with a low, almost imperceptible thrum, a silent frequency that resonated deep within my monstrous form. The beast within me, usually driven by hunger, now stirred with a different kind of agitation. It was a mixture of fear and a strange, almost magnetic pull. I began to rip the room apart, not out of destructive rage, but out of a desperate need to understand. I tore away wallpaper, pulled up floorboards, desperate for more clues. My fingers, thick and clumsy, found a loose panel behind the bookshelf. Behind it, not a safe, but a small, leather-bound journal. It was old, its pages yellowed and brittle. The handwriting inside was Lena's, but it was different from her usual precise, scientific script. This was frantic, almost manic. The ink was faded in places, smudged in others, as if she had written in haste or in tears. I opened it, my claws carefully turning the delicate pages. The first entries were typical, detailing her early research, her theories on genetic manipulation, her Project Chimera. But then the tone shifted. The conventional methods are failing. The subjects are too fragile. They break. They die. There must be a way to anchor the transformation, to make it permanent, to make it more. My eyes scanned frantically, my monstrous mind struggling to process the information. Then, I saw it. A crude drawing, a sketch of one of the symbols I had just found on her furniture, scrawled in the margin. Beneath it, a single, chilling word keys. I turned the page. The entries became less scientific, more esoteric. References to ancient texts, forgotten languages, the geometry of the void. She wrote about channels and conduits, about opening the way. Project Chimera is merely the vessel, a crude, physical manifestation. But the true power, the true transformation, requires something deeper, something other. My blood ran cold. My human mind screamed, but the beast was silent, attentive, almost listening. Lena had not just been trying to create a super soldier or a genetic marvel. She had been trying to create a gateway. The journal continued, detailing her experiments with these symbols. She called them sigils of binding, runes of transference. She believed they could amplify the genetic alterations, stabilize a new form, and, most terrifyingly, attract something from beyond. The subject shows remarkable resilience. His human consciousness, a stubborn anchor. But the sigils are working. I can feel the resonance. Soon, the vessel will be complete. Soon, the other will have a bridge. The words were a punch to the gut. The guttural growl, not my own. That first tore from my throat after my transformation. It was not just my new vocal cords. It was an echo of whatever thing Lena had been trying to pull through me. I flipped to the final entries. They were almost illegible, scrawled with a desperate urgency. The dampener, it must work. It must silence the human mind. The vessel is almost ready. The resonance is growing. I hear whispers from a void. They are coming. Project Chimera will be my legacy. Not just a monster, but a god. And then, the last entry, barely a single word, smeared with what looked like dry blood open. My hands trembled, the journal almost tearing under my grip. Lena had not been trying to control me. She had been trying to erase me, my human consciousness, so that whatever other she was trying to summon could fully inhabit my monstrous form. The neural dampener was not just a tool of control. It was a final step in her horrifying ritual, meant to silence the human so the other could awaken. And I had crushed it. I had crushed her. I had, in my desperation for freedom, unknowingly thwarted her final, horrific act. But the symbols, they were still here, carved into the furniture, imbued with whatever dark energy Lena had poured into them. They hummed a low, almost imperceptible vibration, a silent song that resonated deep within my monstrous body. The beast stirred, not with hunger, but with a strange, almost reverent awe a pull towards the symbols, as if they were calling to something within it. I looked around the room at the innocuous furniture, now transformed into a gallery of cosmic horror. The symbols were not just carvings, they were anchors. They were still active, still drawing something, still opening. I lunged at the desk, my claws tearing into the wood, trying to gouge out the symbol. But it was too deep, too ingrained. The wood splintered, but the lines remained glowing faintly, as if etched with an unearthly light. I tried to smash the bookshelf, to rip out the armchair, but the symbol seemed to resist, radiating a cold, impenetrable energy. The horror was not just what I was. It was what I was meant to become. A vessel, a bridge, a doorway for something unspeakable. And Lena, even in death, had left her horrifying legacy. I was free from her control, yes, but I was still bound. Bound to this monstrous form, yes, but now, bound to far greater, far more terrifying purpose. I was a puppet, and my strings were being pulled by something far older, far darker than Lena could have ever imagined. She was merely the foolish child who had dabbled in forces she could not comprehend, and I was the unwilling key. I fled the compound, back into the suffocating embrace of the forest, but this time, the trees offered no refuge. The symbols were burned into my mind, etched onto the very fabric of my being. I could feel their silent hum within me, a constant, unsettling vibration. The hunger was still there, but now it was overshadowed by a new, more profound dread. I was not just a monster. I was a potential gateway. And the whispers Lena had heard from the void, I could almost hear them now, too. Faint, insidious calling. My horrific new existence had truly just begun. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the real nightmare was still waiting to be unleashed. And I, the unwilling chimera, was its opening act. The rope bit into my wrist, rough and unforgiving, a searing pain cutting off circulation. My ankles were bound just as tightly, rendering me a helpless, thrashing bundle on the cold, grimy floor what Mark so casually called his trophy room. The stale, metallic scent of blood was a thick, cloying blanket, mingling with a musty odor of decay and something else, something sweet and sickening, like old flowers left to rot. Every desperate plea that tore from my throat felt like a waste of breath, swallowed by the oppressive silence of the house, broken only by Mark's low chuckle. He knelt before me, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying delight, a predatory hunger I would only ever seen in nature documentaries. "See, I told you this was inevitable," he purred, his voice a gravelly whisper that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. "You fought, you struggled. That is why you are special. The others, they just broke. But you have spirit." He reached out, his callous thumb tracing the line of my jaw, and I recoiled, a primal scream catching in my throat. His touch felt like a brand, searing my skin. "Do not worry," he said, a grotesque parody of reassurance. "The game has just begun. And you, my dear, are my star player." He stood then, towering over me, a dark silhouette against a single, grimy window that offered no view but a patch of overgrown, dead garden. He was not done talking, not by a long shot. He loved the sound of his own voice, especially when it was recounting his twisted logic. He paced slowly, his footsteps heavy on the dusty floorboards, each creak a hammer blow against my fragile hope. "You see all this." He gestured vaguely around the room, a sweep of his hand encompassing the shelves lined with things. Things I had not dared to truly focus on until now. As my eyes adjusted to gloom, a cold dread seeped into my very core. They were not just bones, not entirely. There were faded photographs, some with smiling faces scratched out, others with tear stains. There were trinkets: a child's worn teddy bear, a tarnished silver locket, a pair of eyeglasses, a cheap plastic watch. Each item was a silent scream, a testament to a life brutally cut short, a story ending here, in this suffocating room. And among them, arranged with sickening artistry, were human remains. A skull, polished and grinning vacantly from a high shelf. a collection of finger bones, neatly arrayed like macabre dominoes. My stomach churned, and I fought against the urge to vomit, tasting bile at the back of my throat. Each one, Mark continued, his voice laced with perverse pride, a player in their own right. But none quite like you. You chose to come. You followed the breadcrumbs. You accepted my invitation. He stopped in front of a particularly gruesome display of mannequin head, its plastic features crudely painted, adorned with a wig of long, dark hair. Dangling from its neck was a delicate silver chain, a single, blood-red ruby glinting in the dim light. My breath hitched. It looked eerily familiar, like something I would seen in a missing persons report, a detail from a local news story that had haunted my periphery for months. This was not just a game, it was a museum of his monstrosity. He knelt again, his face inches from mine, his breath hot and stale. Now for the rules. They are simple, really. You try to escape. I catch you. You resist. I persuade you. And we keep playing until we reach that true connection I spoke of, that shared experience. When you finally understand what it means to be truly mine. He let the word hang in the air, heavy with unspoken threats. Then with a final, chilling smile, he stood. I will be back, he said, almost cheerfully. Do not go anywhere. The door clicked shut, the sound echoing to the cavernous house, a final, definitive period on the sentence of my captivity. Darkness, thick and absolute, swallowed me whole. The single window offered no comfort, only a deeper sense of isolation. I was alone, truly alone, in a house of horrors, surrounded by the ghostly remnants of Mark's victims. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I thrashed, pulling against the ropes, the rough fibers chafing my skin raw. Each desperate tug sent a jolt of pain up my arms, a fresh wave of adrenaline fueling my futile efforts. But the knots were tight, expertly tied, and my strength was already waning. Tears streamed down my face, hot and humiliating, but I could not stop them. This was not happening. This could not be real. I had to wake up. Hours bled into an eternity. My wrists and ankles throbbed, numb in some places, agonizingly painful in others. The floor was hard and cold, and a chill seeped into my bones. My throat was raw from crying out, my voice reduced to a hoarse whisper. The metallic tang of blood filled my mouth, from where I would bitten my lip in frustration. When Mark returned, the sudden flood of light from his flashlight nearly blinded me. He carried a tray, and the smell of something savory, almost appetizing, wafted towards me. My stomach, long empty, growled in protest. He set the tray down just out of my reach, a small plate of what looked like stew and a glass of water. Hungry, he asked, his voice devoid of any real concern, merely an observation. He watched me with an unnerving intensity, as if I were a fascinating specimen under a microscope. You will need your strength. The game is long. He untied one of my hands, just enough for me to reach the spoon, but kept a firm grip on the rope, ready to yank it back if I made any sudden moves. The humiliation was crushing, but the hunger was a primal beast that demanded satisfaction. I ate, my movements clumsy, the food tasting like ash in my mouth despite its warmth. He watched, silent, unblinking. It was a power play, a stark reminder of my utter dependence on him. When I finished, he rebound my hand, tighter this time, making sure I understood there was no generosity in his actions, only control. Days blurred into a terrifying, monotonous cycle. Mark would come and go, sometimes bringing food, sometimes just sitting and talking, his words a twisted sermon of his philosophy, his twisted view of connection. He spoke of how society had lost its way, how people were disconnected, superficial. He, in his sick mind, was forging true bonds, stripping away the pretense. He would leave me in darkness for long stretches, the silence punctuated only by the scuttling of unseen creatures in the walls or the groan of the old house. My mind, deprived of external stimuli, began to play tricks on me. Shadows became monstrous shapes. Whispers became voices. The faces on the trophy shelves seemed to turn and watch me. I learned his routine, or at least parts of it. He was meticulous, almost ritualistic. He would come at roughly the same times for my meager meals. He would spend hours in a different part of the house, sometimes listening to music, sometimes just silence. And then he would sleep. I could hear his heavy footsteps retreating, the thud of a distant door, and then nothing. Just a vast, empty silence of the house, broken only by my own ragged breathing. During these stretches of solitude, my fear slowly began to calcify into something else, a cold, hard resolve. I had to escape. I could not end up a trophy, another forgotten face in his morbid collection. I started testing the ropes, subtly, constantly. My wrists were raw, bleeding in places, but the pain was a dull ache compared to the terror of my situation. I looked for anything, any small imperfection in the knots, any sharp edge on the floor, anything I could use. The trophy room was filled with gruesome curiosities, but also held mundane objects. A rusty toolbox sat under one of the shelves, half hidden by a tattered blanket. Mark had used some of the tools to assemble new shelves, to arrange his macabre displays. He was not always careful about putting them back. One day, during one of his long absences, I noticed it, a glint of metal, a small utility knife, its blade retractable, lay half buried in a pile of sawdust and old magazines, just out of arm's reach from where I was bound. It must have fallen from his pocket, or he would simply forgotten it there in his haste. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. This was my chance. The next few hours were an agonizing test of patience and pain tolerance. I twisted. I strained. I stretched, inch by agonizing inch. The ropes chafed my skin raw, reopening old wounds. My muscles screamed in protest, but I pushed through it, fueled by a desperate hope. I shifted my body, trying to get closer to the knife. The floor was rough, splinters digging into my skin, but I barely registered it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my fingertips brushed against the cold metal handle. It was small but sharp, a wave of relief, so potent it almost brought me to my knees, washed over me. But I could not afford to relax. Now came the hard part. With trembling fingers, I worked the blade. It was difficult, awkward, with my hand still bound. The rope was thick, and the blade was not designed for cutting heavy cord. I had to angle it just right, sawing at the fibers, one by one. It was slow, excruciating work. Every tiny sound I made felt amplified in the oppressive silence. A creak of the floorboards, a rustle of my clothes, even my own ragged breathing, each sound sent a jolt of panic through me, convinced Mark would hear. My wrist burned, the friction of the rope and the blade creating new, stinging wounds. Blood welled up, mixing with the sweat on my skin. But I kept going. I had to. The image of the mannequin head, with its chillingly familiar wig and ruby necklace, spurred me on. I would not be another trophy. Finally, with a soft, almost imperceptible snap, a single strand of rope gave way. Then another, and another. It felt like an eternity. But eventually, the main knot on my left wrist loosened. I pulled, a surge of adrenaline giving me unnatural strength, and with a gasp, my left hand was free. The feeling of liberation was intoxicating, but fleeting. My hand was numb, stiff, and covered in blood. I quickly, silently, used the knife to cut the remaining ropes on my right wrist, and then, with even more difficulty, my ankles. The relief of being unbound was overwhelming, but the pain, now that my body was no longer under duress, was intense. My limbs ached, protesting the sudden movement after so long in one position. I sat there for a moment, catching my breath, the small utility knife clutched tightly in my freed hand. My heart hammered, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. What now? Escape was the obvious answer, but a cold, hard thought settled in my mind. Even if I escaped this house, Mark would still be out there. He knew my name, he knew where I lived. He would not stop. He would find me. He would find others. No, this had to end. Here, tonight. The knife felt surprisingly heavy in my hand. It was a tool, a simple blade, but in this moment, it felt like a weapon of justice, or maybe just a weapon of desperate survival. The line between the two felt blurred. I crept toward the door, my movement stiff and uncertain after days of being bound. Each step was a silent prayer, a test of the creaking floorboards. The house was a labyrinth of shadows, every corner a potential ambush. I moved slowly, my senses on high alert, listening for any sound, any sign of Mark. The air was cold, thick with dust and the lingering scent of decay. The trophy room door, which had seemed so impenetrable, now opened with a soft click. I eased it open just a sliver and peered out into the darkened hallway. Moonlight, filtered through grimy windows, cast long, distorted shadows that danced with every rustle of the wind outside. The house was silent, a suffocating silence that pressed in on me from all sides. Where would he be? He usually went to A, different part of the house, to sleep. I remembered hearing his footsteps, the faint sound of a door closing. I had to find him. I moved through the house like a ghost, my bare feet padding silently on the cold floorboards. My eyes, now accustomed to gloom, scanned every shadow, every doorway. The house was enormous, a decaying mansion that felt like it had been abandoned for decades, yet it was meticulously kept in its state of disrepair by Mark. Every room I passed was filled with old, dust-shrouded furniture, covered in white sheets like spectral figures. The air grew colder as I moved deeper into the house, a bone-chilling dampness that hinted at long-neglected corners and forgotten secrets. I passed what looked like a dilapidated kitchen, then a dining room, a massive, ornate table covered in more sheets. Each room felt like a tomb, a testament to a life that had long since departed, replaced by Mark's macabre existence. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart in my ears. Then, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound. Breathing, deep, even breathing, coming from a room at the end of a long, dark hallway. My breath hitched. This was it. I crept closer, the knife held tightly, its small blade a cold comfort in my sweaty palm. The door to the room was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of darkness that seemed to beckon me forward. I pushed it open slowly, carefully, trying not to make a sound. The hinges groaned, a soft, protesting whisper that made my blood run cold. I froze, holding my breath, listening. Nothing, only the rhythmic breathing. I eased myself into the room. It was not a bedroom in the traditional sense. It was another library, perhaps, or a study. Bookshelves lined the walls, overflowing with dusty tomes, their spines cracked and faded. In the center of the room, on an old, worn leather couch, Mark lay asleep. He was sprawled out, his large frame taking up most of the couch, a heavy woolen blanket pulled up to his chest. His face, usually contorted into a predatory grin or a chillingly blank mask, was softened in sleep. He looked almost human, almost normal. The sight of him, vulnerable and unaware, sent a strange mix of terror and grim satisfaction through me. This was the man who had orchestrated my nightmare, who had collected lives like trophies, who had reveled in my fear. And now he was at my mercy. I moved closer, each step deliberate, agonizingly slow. The floorboards beneath my feet groaned softly, and I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Mark stirred, a soft groan escaping his lips, but he did not wake. He just shifted, pulling the blanket tighter, his breathing remaining deep and even. I stood over him, the knife raised, its small blade glinting faintly in the dim moonlight filtering to the dusty windows. My hand was shaking, not just from the exertion, but from the immense weight of the moment. This was it. This was my chance. To end it. To end him. To reclaim my life, and perhaps, in some small way, to avenge the others. My mind raced, a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Fear, hatred, a desperate need for survival, and a terrifying sense of power. Could I do it? Could I take a life? Even the life of a monster? The image of the ruby necklace, the child's teddy bear, the vacant skull, they flashed before my eyes, fueling my resolve. He deserved this. He had brought this upon himself. I took a deep, shuddering breath, my eyes fixed on his sleeping face. His chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm, a testament to the life I was about to extinguish. My grip on the knife tightened, my knuckles white. This was the only way. Just as I began to lower my arm, just as the tip of the blade was inches from his throat, his eyes snapped open. There was no slow awakening, no groggy confusion. One moment, he was deeply asleep. The next, his eyes were wide, fixed on me, on the knife in my hand. They were cold, calculating, immediately aware. There was no terror in them. Not yet. Only a chilling, almost attached surprise. A flicker of something akin to amusement. Well, he whispered, his voice rough with sleep, but laced with undeniable, terrifying pleasure. Look what the cat dragged in. My blood ran cold. He had not just woken up, he had been aware. Or perhaps he had simply been waiting. The realization hit me like a physical blow he had known. He had planned for this. This was part of his game. He had wanted me to break free, to find a knife, to stand over him. He had orchestrated this moment, just as he had orchestrated everything else. The amusement in his eyes solidified into something far more dangerous. His mouth, which had been curved into a slight, almost innocent smile in sleep, now twisted into his familiar, predatory grin. The game had not ended with my escape. It had merely escalated. Before I could react, before I could plunge the knife, he moved with a sudden, shocking speed. His hand shot out, not to grab the knife, but to grasp my wrist, twisting it with brutal force. A scream tore from my throat as the knife clattered to the floor, sliding across the dusty wood with a sickening scrape. Pain exploded through my arm, hot and blinding. He did not let go. He pulled me forward, off balance, and I stumbled, falling onto the couch beside him. His other arm wrapped around my waist, pinning me against a surprisingly strong body. The smell of him, stale and musky, filled my nostrils, making my stomach churn. Such spirit, he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly rumble against my ear, sending shivers of pure terror down my spine. I knew you would not disappoint me. But you really thought it would be that easy, did not you? He laughed then, a low, guttural sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the decaying house. It was not a laugh of joy, but of triumph, of absolute, undisputed control. My heart hammered so violently it felt like it would burst from my chest. I struggled, thrashing against his grip, but he was too strong, too heavy. His arm around my waist was an iron band, his hand on my wrist of ice. The pain in my arm was excruciating, a searing agony that made my vision blur. The knife was a test, he whispered, his breath warm on my neck. A little incentive. I wanted to see if you had the courage. And you do. You truly are special. He shifted, pinning me more securely beneath him, his weight crushing. I could feel the hard lines of his muscles, the oppressive heat of his body. My desperate struggles only seemed to fuel his perverse delight. Now, he said, his voice dropping to a chillingly playful tone, the game really begins. And this time, my dear, I choose the rules. He tightened his grip on my wrist, and I cried out a raw, animalistic sound of pain and despair. My eyes darted around the room, searching frantically for the fallen knife, for any glimmer of hope, any way out. But it was gone, swallowed by the shadows, just out of reach. His eyes, still gleaming with that terrifying delight, locked onto mine. There was no escape. Not now. Not from him. And as his predatory grin widened, I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that my nightmare had only just begun. The true horror was not just being trapped in this house, it was being trapped with him, in his twisted game, knowing that every move I made, every breath I took, was just another piece in his elaborate, sickening puzzle. And I was unequivocally his bound pawn.